Hello everyone, welcome back to another stream. It's been a hot minute, hasn't it? Let me know if you guys can hear me. Hopefully things should be good. I should turn off the notes. Anyway, I hope you're all doing well. As always, Winterlight, welcome in. Mortis Volt, Scaleasy, Scholar of Kurland, Bella, Earthmind, Spectre. Nice to have all of you guys again. Stella, it's been 84 years indeed. Elden Enthusiast, I'm glad you're in chat. I meant to DM you. I know you finally finished your lore video, and I was thinking of looking at that live on stream tomorrow, if you're fine with that. If not, that's totally fine. If you don't want to discuss it publicly, it's totally understandable. Just go ahead and DM me on the Discord and everything. So, yeah. All right, you guys can hear me? Sweet. It's kind of funny if I was talking for that long without being able to be heard. Wouldn't be a first on this stream by any means. But anyway, Levovit, welcome in. Roy, nice to have you guys. All right. Mic upgrade sounds crisp, but like in a good way. I don't necessarily know if this is an upgrade, but my old headset was dying, and I'd been using like an actual mic for a while, but I was like, well, if I'm going to have to buy a new set of headphones, well, like a headset, you know, for gaming and stuff, regardless, I may as well like do a little bit of research. And so before this stream, I was like trying to touch up some of my settings to just like actually make my voice sound a bit better and stuff. It's such a pain in the butt trying to balance all the audio stuff. So hopefully when we go into the videos, it'll sound like a good balance between my voice and the stuff in the background. I might need to adjust some things here and there. Hopefully like my voice isn't being attenuated too strongly and like crackling and breaking up for you guys, but okay. Sounds kind of worse. Yeah, I think the sound isn't better, but I don't think it's like significantly worse either. So anyway, thanks for that. Ethan, welcome into the stream. Will I plan to do in the future reaction to subscriber theories? That is a possibility. I've considered it before. Sometimes I don't necessarily want to come across as though that I'm just like dogpiling on everybody else's theories. It's like, oh, my theories are the best. Like, two theories enter, one theory leaves. That kind of Mad Max Thunderdome style setting. But I have considered it before. It's just also like, if it's all in text, it's a little bit more difficult for me to give a fair reading to what I'm looking at, because I would need to read it out loud and try to enunciate it properly, like the way that it's supposed to be like intended, which is kind of difficult in and of itself, and then also process it on my end. And I'm really bad at like reading things out loud and absorbing what I'm saying as I'm doing it. I don't know. It's kind of, yeah. Anyway, it's a good question though. I've certainly considered it, and if somebody feels strongly about it and like really wants me to do it, I will certainly consider it in the future. And like a lot of stuff like depends on length and things like that. So for me personally, like the video format reaction just seems to get like a better space for me to kind of like absorb what they're saying and then bounce off of it, especially because I can like rewind. I guess I could like, you know, essentially rewind text. But anyway, thanks for the question. Okay. So let's go ahead and dive on into our reaction to the Shadow of the Erdtree playlist right here. So I don't have like a ton of videos queued right now just because like I'm certain I'm going to take a lot of time to like go through the very few that we have. So potentially on the list, I have the actual trailer. I've definitely watched it a bunch of times. I haven't really watched anybody's reactions, but I know like we've all discussed it in the Discord enough. Hey, Levovit, welcome into the Old Lore Hunter crew. Thank you so much for becoming a channel member. And now I can actually make out the Radagon icon, PFP. So, what was I saying with the trailer? Right. So we've certainly discussed the trailer enough on the Discord, and I've been in like a couple servers where like I'm certain like some other people's ideas have like gotten filtered through to me. So like, unfortunately, this isn't like a completely blind reaction and everything, but yeah, there's a lot of stuff to cover with just this 3-minute clip. So hopefully we will uncover it all. No, that's a lie. So anyway, Santeria 1911. Nice to see you again. It's been a while. Okay, so let's go on in
Peggy 16.
Oop, sorry, my old habits of playing things at twice speed rears its ugly head.
Pure and radiant, he wields love to shrive clean the hearts of men.
So this seems like my internet, or maybe the video is just being a bit choppy for me. Anyway, yeah, obviously we're going to interact potentially with the cocoon to get into the Shadowlands. That's like the prevailing theory. That was also the prevailing theory before the DLC was even announced. I don't know why my computer does that sometimes. Anyway. Hey Rob, welcome in. Oh boy. See, it annoys me when like it's got this much of the video allegedly buffered and then it does stuff like this. Zoink Scoob. Struggling to find me an ad? Well, the thing is, I've got the Prime thing, or Premium.
There is no
Oh yeah, that's right, I forgot. That's like the trick to get past like the stupid buffering stuff, to just not full screen it for a second. Yeah. So yeah. If you're watching full screen, at least for me, sometimes just going into windowed mode or theater mode or whatever the hell they call it is good enough to fix it. Bruh, okay.
more terrifying.
See, as soon as I exited that. Alright, and our dude just said, I should probably put the captions on, although they're kind of annoying. So, Mikola with love, like, strives clean the hearts of men, something like that? Oh my god, why? Okay. I'm just gonna refresh it.
Peggy 16.
You know what? Let's do this. Yeah, I downloaded this. Well, actually, I recorded it, so the quality might be slightly worse, but you know what? Screw all the buffering.
Radiant, he wields love to shrive clean the hearts of men.
So what was it? Pure and radiant, he wields love to strive clean the hearts of men, something like that. So yeah, that kind of ties into the one item quote. I don't have my spreadsheet pulled up. Anyway, where it talks about how Millennia says Mikola is the most fearsome Empyrean of all. And I think that kind of quote right here like lends into that kind of a characterization. Most fearsome. It'll take a second to find. Okay, it's the Millennia's winged helm. Or just her armor set, apparently. Where I don't know how this is going to look for you guys. That should be good enough. Let me look at my OBS thing. Yeah, that should be good enough. Okay, so my brother will keep his promise. He possesses the wisdom, the allure of a god. He is the most fearsome Empyrean of all. And bewitching branches are obviously like the Mikola specialty here. The Empyrean Mikola is loved by many people. Indeed, he has learned very well how to compel such affection. So this kind of trailer speech here just kind of builds into that kind of a characterization of Mikola that we have so far. Just like Griffith, maybe. Am I going to watch the DLC analysis videos in a certain way, like somebody you want to hear from the most, or will it be random? So, okay, that's a good question. My thoughts are for right now, let's pull... it's still pretending to buffer. Okay, so I have the 15 hidden details you might have missed from IGN, just for like a kind of a... what I'm assuming is going to be a pretty vanilla video. It's 9 minutes long. And then Ratatosker has 2 interesting videos that I thought would probably be really relevant in the grand scheme of things, in that the first one, he looks at the interviews that Miyazaki did with IGN and Famitsu, I believe, and then he talks about a mechanic that was kind of hinted at, I think, in the Famitsu interview, and he just kind of talks about that. And then beyond that, I thought Zoli the Witch might have something interesting. And then I've heard of Bandit Games. I don't remember if I've watched anything by them. If I did, it might have been on the meme night, and I just don't really remember. And I don't think we're going to have enough time, but I have like the Lore Hunter and Smotown. And Smo's is like 40 minutes long, so I definitely won't have time for that. Thank you, Rob, for telling everyone to like this stream. Yeah, okay. So, let's go back to the actual video form of this.
There is nothing more terrifying.
So yeah, nothing more terrifying, just goes in with the Millennia Armor thing. So obviously, like this little field of reeds, whatever you want to call it. Oh, this looks like a map thing. I didn't notice that. Anyway, that might not be like where you pick up a map marker, like, you know, map fragments, but that's kind of what it looks like. Is basically the exact same as like the trailer, not trailer, the key art promotional thing with Mikola on a spirit steed. Many people say it's Torrent. We don't actually have that full on confirmation with like Ronnie gifting us Torrent and everything. There's a strong possibility. So yeah. Hey, Mr. Yada, nice to see you again. All right, so there's like a ton to unpack with just this shot. So I don't necessarily like want to talk about the veil too much because we don't really know. I know some people have theorized that this could be kind of similar to like the quote unquote Baldachin blessing that you would get, and like a Baldachin is apparently like sorry, the dog. What are you doing? A baldachin is like a series of curtains that are meant to be like draped around a bed to like give it a bit of privacy. So there is a certain kind of a visual resemblance between like curtains draped around a bed and like what's going on with this. We don't know the full story. We've got the quote unquote shadow of the Erdtree. I think, yeah, I'm pretty confident they actually just call it like the shadow tree, at least for Miyazaki in like the Famitsu interview, or at least in the Japanese. I don't remember if there's anything in like the official English which is like said it quite that way. It flows a little bit better in the Japanese, but that's not too big a deal. We have what looks to be like amber or sap pouring out of the potential shadow tree into like what could be this basin. This basin here kind of reminds me of the idea of the rune arc of like pooling and collecting the blessings. So maybe an Elden Ring could have been here. I don't really believe that. I'm just kind of like spitballing here. Then we've got the big castle, which is kind of like in a Lindell style location. What are you doing? And hey, Future Warrior Hero 123. Was Moxie Watson here? Maybe I missed her. Look at the greenery in the background. Hey, howdy. I love music. Welcome in. Elle says, in Japanese, it's Golden Tree Shadow, with Golden Tree being the Japanese name for the Erdtree. True. So yeah, I kind of mentioned it briefly in my last video where like, the Erdtree is Ogonju. Ogon is gold, and then Ju or Ki is tree. And so, do they call it the Golden Tree Shadow? Probably. I thought they like truncated it to just like Shadow Tree. I would need to double check. It's definitely been a hot minute since I looked. So, right. So, going back to like this footage here, we've got like a lot of disparate elements going on. So we've got like a broken landscape. Like these roots should, I think in my mind, they should connect down here. So it looks like there was an upheaval of some sort in this kind of Shadowland, whatever you want to call it. We've got some ruins down here, like a watchtower with like the same kind of weird roots going on. We've got like the arches that we just saw in the footage like a moment ago. but it seems like it might extend further. Bad Lad on the Discord server pointed out that this like little orange reddish speck, I don't know how well I can like show that off for you guys on the stream. It might be the Wicker Man fire giant thing that we'll see later in the trailer, which I thought was a really good observation. Kind of funny too. So right, was there anything else? Like, yeah, I think it's probably just easier to like go through and then try to like fit things in retroactively. Yeah, okay. You love the creepy roots? Me too. And Dover B, welcome in. Alright, so this thing is really cool. I believe that this is supposed to be like Miquella's rune arc, and my rationale for that will come at the very, very end of this video, because you get a gesture for pre-ordering. It's called like Miquella's rune or something like that. Miquella's circle. I would need to double check it. And the pose that the person is doing is similar to this, and that like it's the YMCA, but the C is backwards. So anyway, we don't exactly know who this knight is. I would say you might be able to think he's the Tarnished, but I'm pretty sure this dude shows up later on and the Tarnished is like fighting him, so he seems to be like an NPC of some sort rather than the Tarnished character. Although maybe this is the Tarnished character just wearing that like assorted set of armor and like following things that Miquella left for them. That might be a thing later on. So now we've come closer to the Shadow Tree. We see like the rune arc type thing going over here, a bridge, like this castle area, so some forests and ramparts. Isaiah Storm's recent video analysis about the locations is really good. Yeah, there's just so much content to cover. I thought about adding a video by him. I just feel like no matter what I watch, there's not going to be enough time to just go through all this analysis in one stream. So I might split this up into like 2, maybe even 3 streams, seeing what everybody else is saying and like building off of it, you know, just hyping up the DLC ad nauseum till it launches. Not really, but yeah, it's definitely fun to go through it all. You're hearing a theory that the big gap in the Lands Between map is the Land of Shadows covered up by the Veil. Thoughts? I've wondered about that. I think it's plausible. I just don't really have a super strong opinion, just because it's easy to get burned. I really don't have a better way to say it.
In that forsaken place.
So this dude's armor set kind of reminds me of Tragoth's, but not really. It's almost like the bull set without the horns, but I don't really think they're supposed to be related. That's just kind of like what immediately popped up into mind. He's by some of these spiral pillars, which you see in a lot of places. The like building back here kind of reminds me of like one of the castles that's like kind of like Fair Missoula later on, like kind of crumbling towards the sky, but it kind of seems like in a different location. So she seems to be more on the eastern side of the map, and part of the reason I say that is because like these mountain spires I think are like on the southeast portion of the map from like the big view that we saw, like the introductory section into the Shadowlands or whatnot. Hey SNX, welcome on in. Nice to see you again. Doing well. And Juan Camille Rodriguez, welcome in. Do you think we'll be seeing a 30-minute cinematic of Moog sharing his bloody bed with Miquella Lucy? I don't think so. No, because we gotta kill him for that to happen.
In that forsaken place.
Oh yeah, and then I meant to talk about her a bit more. So the color of the sky here is very interesting because it kind of reminds me of Caelid. And if you do want to think that the Shadowlands could be in the center of the Lands Between, I do think there is a lot of I don't want to say like merit, but maybe not support, but I think it could tie things together a bit more nicely, because there are certain features of Caelid that are similar to what you would find in the mountaintops of the Giants and the Forbidden Lands, and if this could connect the two and have like been a land bridge between the two areas, that would certainly fit together quite nicely with how disjointed the current version of the map plays out in the game. Because otherwise I think you would have to try to cobble together some kind of like Pangea theory, although this doesn't necessarily contradict it. It might only support the land's Pangea. Ethan, welcome on in. From what you understand, where we go in the DLC is like a dream world, since we likely use Miquella's sleeping body to transport there. Maybe. So, I don't know how popular this theory is. At least I'm pretty sure like Crunchy might like it, because he and I have like talked about it briefly, or like I looked at his videos and like we've kind of like bounced off each other a bit. Is that, in my mind, I think it is certainly plausible that the Shadowlands could be analogous to the quote-unquote spirit realm that is mentioned in Helfen Steeple. Let me just go ahead and pull up the description for you guys. For anybody who may not know. Okay. So Helfen Steeple is a greatsword patterned after the black steeple of the Helfen, the lampwood which guides the dead of the spirit world. So a little bit of like a translational note here is that spirit world, as far as the Japanese is concerned, is... Where am I? Blind. Okay. It's literally the first... Oh, no. This is Reikai, so this is certainly Spirit World. Where's Ikai? That must be with the Newman or the Nox or something like that. Okay, never mind. I take it back. So yeah, I wouldn't be surprised if the Shadowlands are kind of like that, but we'll just have to wait and see. Where we going?
In that forsaken place, blood must spill. Blood of your fellows. The Erdtree faithful.
Alright, so, man, all this stuff goes by super quickly. So we get our first swamp appearance, potentially. I can't really make out what's going on here. These kind of look like corpses with, like, items coming off them, perhaps. So this building is very interesting because while this area is kind of reminiscent of the Shaded Castle, it's different in terms of, like, its architecture. Like, these kind of, what are they called? These aren't parapets, I don't believe. Anyway, this style of, like, building seems, like, simpler than many of the other types of buildings that we currently have in the Lands Between. So it just kind of feels a bit more aged, just because of, like, not only its architecture, but, like, the fact that it's kind of, like, decrepit in the swamp. And then to immediately build off that, we get to transition into that, like, painting, that there's a lot to talk about with that. So it looks like our Tarnished right here might have, like, the Raven set on. It's kind of hard to tell, though. But we got some of, like, the big roots over here. We got, like, scraggly little swamp-like trees. I don't know, like, how better to describe them right now. Possibly new foraging item on the right. Oh, like this right here? Maybe. Although they do kind of look like... It's kind of hard to say whether it's this thing or just these flowers. Or maybe something here. Is that root resin? Yeah, that's a good point. Thanks for bringing that up. Oh, yeah, dungeon. I was talking about, like, the pointed spire type thing, specifically. But I don't necessarily know if this is the dungeon, because there might be more beyond this that we can't really see. Headless bodies in the back? I can't see the headless bodies. Or you just mean these things. Are they headless? Maybe. They could just be, like, crouched. So it's kind of hard to tell. Yeah, it does kind of look like a witch hut. And welcome back to the stream, Philanthropist. So yeah, this painting is super cool. This is the Woman of Mystery. Everyone's like, oh no, is this Marika? Is this Melina? She does seem to be a brunette, which, does hair color even really mean anything as far as, like, Marika's concerned? Because she's blonde when she's Marika, redhead when she's Radagon. Then Melina is, like, kind of pinkish haired when she's out and about, but if you do the Frenzy Flame ending and spare her, she ends up becoming raven haired herself. So speculation has run rampant. Her, like, little hair, I guess this isn't really hair. I don't know even what to call this. Like, scarf. Definitely not a scarf. Anyway, I'm going to move past that. This kind of design might show up somewhere else in the trailer, which will be kind of cool to keep an eye out on. And then this dude, we should potentially see him later on in a little bit of a different format, but his medallion is very fascinating to me because it looks like it could be akin to like 3 different things, whether or not it's like the torch of Saint Trina, or I think like the Erdtree burial watchdog crozier staff type thing. It could resemble that, or it could be something completely different. But this medallion will identify him later on. He kind of looks like a Gehrman, obviously from Bloodborne, because he's just an old dude sitting down in a chair. But he looks like he's got like a scar underneath his left eye. So it looks like he was probably like a warrior king of some sort, or just something along those lines. Velka confirmed. No, it can't be Velka confirmed. She's got all her hair right here, so she didn't undo her lock. Yeah. Tassels. Yeah, that's a good word for it. These look like Marika's parents? Maybe, but if they are, then that raises the question whether or not the Newman come from the Shadowlands specifically, which is arguable and may not be likely because Miyazaki and or some promotional material has stated that the Shadowland is essentially the land where Marika first alighted, and alighted means like to have like descended or like disembarked. It's a little bit ambiguous what that terminology means exactly in this context, but we'll just have to wait and learn more. He looks like the monk statue with the bloom. Maybe. I don't know, because like the monk statue has like more burns, but I could definitely see what you're going for with that. Ethan says, are the Newman from another continent we never see? That's a good question. We don't know. It could be a continent. It could be like a completely different world because of like the way that they're referred to. Like, yeah, it's just kind of like up in the air, like kind of the way that I envision it. And this is headcanon, is kind of like the equivalent of Tinkerbell existing in Neverland in the Peter Pan fable, or whatever you want to call it, the story there. And like she kind of can cross like the galaxy or dimensions and whatnot to go from like Neverland to Earth and vice versa, provided you have like the fairy dust to make the trip. Some women say that woman is actually Tanith. That's kind of interesting. I don't know how I feel about that. That would be pretty cool, though. That lady seems to be pregnant based on the picture. So yeah, that's kind of like one of the more difficult things to tell. Like the way she is kind of like cradling her womb type area could be suggestive of that. Like her dress is kind of loose, but it's also like a little bit of a weird angle to look at the picture. You may very well be right, and I'm glad you brought that up. And so this is very interesting to me because we've got these jars here, and within the lands between themselves, they've all got like the Erdtree crest on them, but that doesn't necessarily mean that is the case here. So were the jars manufactured here? Is this where living jars were created? Maybe, maybe not. There's some like cut 1.0 item descriptions which say that like they were experiments in immortality, but that kind of got retconned. Now, aside from the jars, we've also got like what I would call like the Blackstone civilization, like potentially golem style stuff, super giant pillars going on in the background, like in places you'd see in the ruin-strewn precipice. So very fascinating stuff going on over here. And then I really love like this little turbine, I don't know what to call it right now, where it like spins the lava, or it's doing something. So this seems to actually have like a purpose rather than just being some random like pillar that fell, because it's got like specific chains and everything like that. And then we've got our prisoner, our Griffith character, those like little rapier, just walking up. So that was really quick. And this is kind of obviously reminiscent of many of the catacombs, or maybe hero graves more specifically, like the Gelmir ones. So if that's the case, it doesn't really match up super well, because like a lot of this other stuff does seem to be more of like the Blackstone civilization in terms of like its design, although none of it really matches up 1-to-1 with what we have in the base game, at least. So it could be something completely different, or it could be like the what's the word, like the mediary interim in between the two civilizations, something like that, like the bridge between them. The jar scene looks like the basement of the Tower of Rebirth from Berserk. Another Burke reference, yeah. Hey, 2Hit, welcome into the stream again. The pump is an Archimedes screw. I feel like I should remember what that is, but I kind of don't right now. But thanks for letting me know. Eldon says, about the Newman coming from outside the lands between, you'd think it'd be cool if they arrived on those abandoned galleons that show up in the trailer. It'd be cooler if they were literal spaceships from space, just because they're from another world. So yeah, I was definitely going to get to that when we got to it, but yeah, those are very fascinating features in the background there. For some reason, you keep thinking FromSoft reads manga? Nah. So this is the building that I was talking about earlier with the dude that kind of looked like Tragoth. Maybe he could be over here, but like part of the reason why I said that is because we got the spiral stuff, and like this thing back here is kind of reminiscent to what we had. So where was that? Okay, so like this right here. So yeah, he might be there, although I don't think we can see these. So that it might match up, it might not. We've got skies. So it's a little too far forward. Or is that 108? So yeah. I can't really see if there's any of the headstones, or that could be like a loading thing. Anyway, so this place to me is very, very interesting because it's kind of reminiscent of Fair Azula in a way, because we've got like the crumbling rocks going skyward, although it seems a lot more self-contained, a little bit smaller. I can't exactly make out what's going on over here. It looks like just a ridge. I did notice, so I think there's like some like loading stuff going on in like one part of the trailer, which is kind of funny to me, but it's not too important right now. So anyway, yeah, the architecture here doesn't match anything in the base game explicitly, and we've got some more of the spiral pillars. Actually, those might show up in Volcano Manor, so I might be a little bit wrong about that. There might be some ties between like whatever created Volcano Manor and like whatever's going on here in the Shadow Realm.
Never saints.
Is that a legacy dungeon? I think it most likely would be. The Wicker Man is such a great enemy design.
Happen to be on the losing side of a war.
So this is like the Fire Giant 2.0? I don't know. I'm going to be very curious to see how this fight turns out. And so, like, this thing is awesome. There's, like, I don't know. I said I wanted, like, more artificed enemies and, like, Elden Ring. Like, that's, like, the one thing that I think that they did that is, like, completely, maybe not, like, completely unique, but is, like, really underexplored for, like, a lot of high fantasy type settings, and I think they just kind of knocked it out of the park with the very few things that they did have, like the abductor virgins. I thought were like super cool, and seeing something like this, it feels so FromSoft, it feels so Berserk, it feels so right for being as terrible and awful as it is. So the Wicker Man, for anybody who doesn't know, it's like a story. I don't really remember all the particulars, but anyway, the main takeaway here is that sacrifices would be put into a kind of like essentially mecha type contraption that would be ritualistically burned for sacrificial reasons. I don't remember like what culture did it. I'm pretty sure it was Celtic, but like the whole mythos of it has been really, I don't want to say like corrupted, but it's been like co-opted by other types of media and whatnot. So I'm sure there's like much more to it that I don't fully know. So they like took that concept of the Wicker Man and like dialed it up to 11 by, rather than having like 1 to 3 sacrifices, this dude is just like full of sacrifices. Like its legs has corpses in it. Its arms are all just like people. Everything. I can't really tell what like the pseudo style like claw gripper tentacle fingers are supposed to be like made out of. But anyway, the really bizarre thing to me is that while this dude does kind of have like some sun-like symbolism based on like the mask, it also has like omen-esque features with the way that the horns pop out of it. So one of the biggest questions that I have going into the Shadow of the Erdtree is, are the Omen specifically a pre-Erdtree type civilization type thing, which I think many people believe. I've like kind of gone back and forth on that idea, because if the Omen in the form of what's his face, Morgoth and Moog are described as Erdtree royalty, that kind of implies to me that they should be like, you know, descendants of the Erdtree, or they should like postdate the Erdtree, but that doesn't necessarily mean that things similar to them couldn't have existed before the Erdtree and whatnot. Anyway, that kind of whole Omen style feature will become more relevant further on throughout the trailer, and we'll see like some Omen style horns appear on the Lion Dancer, as well as some like lion statues. So my question goes back to, are the Omens specifically pre-Erdtree or post-Erdtree? And yeah, that ties into like everything with like the crucible. And I guess I should bring that up. Like if the Erdtree is the crucible, like legitimately, and there is no like primordial soup, like I've been arguing, then could the Omen predate that form of the Erdtree and crucible? And if so, like what does that mean? How does that all fit in? Are the Misbegotten specifically like products of the Erdtree, and they've been blended in a way that the Omen haven't? Those are just kind of all the lingering questions that I have. This is the final evolution of the Rotten. Oh no, we've got a shoulder dude. Dung Eater vibes? Exactly. With like the, if you want to like, yeah, I'm glad you brought that up, because I thought about Dung Eater, but I forgot how to tie it into it. So like the sun medallion on his chest, is that kind of like reminiscent of this thing? We've got like the Omen horns versus like the Omen ending. What's it called? Anyway, moving on. It's going to be one of the huge enemies, like the Tree Sentinel and the Limgrave. Yeah, I'm kind of curious to see how they're going to balance the game, especially with like. Anyway, we'll get into that a lot more later. Elle thinks that the Omens were once connected to the ancestral followers. I don't know about that. I know many people like to say that because the ancestral followers have budding horns, that is indicative that they were like products of the crucible. I would disagree with that, because I believe that the ancestral followers hunted beasts that had the horns growing on them. Like that's kind of explicit in the item. And to me, the ancestral followers are not very chimeric in nature, but that isn't to say that there aren't similarities between the Omens and like how at least the ancestral like regal spirits might like assimilate death within themselves to some degree. Knowing FromSoft, this enemy will be weak to fire for some reason. Hey Goddess Spaghetti, nice to see you again. Are the things on its wrist burnt arms? You mean these? No, these are like people coming out of it, so they're kind of like reaching out of it. If you've played Dark Souls 3, if you go into the undead settlement, there's going to be like a bunch of like cages, crow's nests, whatever they're called, that have like a similar type thing going on here. Omens may have been more common during the Crucible. Interviews from Miyazaki have said the remnants of ancient cultures will be explored in the Shadowlands, so it's possible some will be preserved. Yeah, so that's kind of like one of those things. Like, I'm not sure if Omens do predate the Crucible or if they post-date it. And part of that is like, if Misbegottens are the way that they are because of the Erdtree, that makes sense. One thing that I've wondered is like why specifically the Omen are said to be graceless. That could very well be because they were from a period in which there was no grace. And according to like the old the cut Lowlander rune description or the old Lands Between rune description, grace was specifically brought with the Erdtree. So before the Erdtree, there was no grace, allegedly, I guess. But, that is kind of cut content despite it like being in 1.0. So, yeah. Corpse gauges, yeah. Another Nana disappeared. So now we got, what are they called? A worm face type thing going on. Although this seems to be more of like a flatworm almost. And it's gulping our boy, our Karian boy. So this cutscene or like clip right here is really interesting to me because this kind of does confirm that like you still can see the moon in the Shadowlands, which is interesting. So does this exist in a kind of same liminal space as like the actual Lands Between? Is this kind of all like a big ass Everjail? Maybe, maybe not. It's very weird that you can't see the moon. Maybe that could be accounted for if you say this is a dream. But the moon kind of also seems to be the same style of moon that you'd see in the Lands Between, like Limgrave and whatnot. And like the positioning of this moon in relation to where like the characters are fixated is kind of similar to the angle that you would get looking towards like the Blythe Everjail. What's the one? The Darrowell one? I can't remember the name of it, but anyway. So, yeah, I don't know. Cage spider, thank you. He sucked his insight. There's a theory that says in the trailer the moon looks bigger and looks more clear, suggesting that the Shadowlands is in the sky beyond the clouds. It does certainly look a lot bigger here. Although this could be... Is this an FOV thing? I don't know. So this is like one of the coolest enemies I've seen so far in a FromSoft game, in my opinion. So this is really easy to miss, and it took me like the second or third time like watching this to notice. But this is a hand, and you've got like the lion jaw and like a puppet style like flat herbivore type jaw on the inside, and so this hand is operating the mouth, or mouths, I guess I should say. So we got like an Omen style foot. So yeah, this dude's foot is very similar to the Omen. Oh yeah, and I should probably point out that our boy also has kind of long nails, which might sound like a little bit awkward to point that out right now, but it will become more relevant later on when we look at Mesmer specifically. So yeah, that's pretty much all you'll see of the pilots within this thing. I'm pretty confident there's 3 dudes. Some people think it's only 2, but I think you can like kind of make out the forms of 3. So this thing is super cool because obviously it's like a big ass lion. The eyes are kind of like creepy. That's cool. Then we got like the, chattering teeth type thing going on the inside. But then like it's kind of got like a crown of thorns, which ends up being like Omen style horns. And those Omen style horns also appear all along the back of this thing. And I don't know whether or not this is something that would have been I don't want to say like native, intrinsic, that might be a better word, intrinsic to like the lion thing that they're like hoisting around, or whether or not like the history of the Shadowlands also changed with the history of the Erdtree and whatnot, and like whether or not everything in this area could have also gotten blended up later. So let me try to think of a better way to articulate that. So what I mean by that is, if you take the history of the Lands Between, you have the arrival of the Erdtree, it blending things together, all that nonsense. Then you've got like the Golden Order and all that nonsense. And so you have things like the Omen and Misbegotten potentially, being messed with because of the Order and then being disdained. So my question is, did a similar type of scale of history occur in the Shadowlands as it did in the Lands Between? I think that's a possibility, and if so, it is going to be so much harder to like actually pour through the lore if you have to like try to figure out a completely different civilization's history based off of like a kind of shared event system. Which, if so, I think that'll be super cool to like go through it that way, but it'll also be slightly annoying, to be fair. So anyway, yeah. looks like we have another set of legs here. So this would be like potentially the third dude. Then I think the second dude would be like in the body, and then the first dude would be like here. So I think there's 3 dudes total, and you'll like see more about that later. I pointed out the tassels on that lady's hair earlier. I think Teensith in the server was the one who pointed it out to me that like there might be a bit of a through line here. And then, oh, we've got like a statuesque here. Anyway, it's really hard to make out a lot of the details in the background because of like the fog and the natural blur. So anyway, going back to chat. Spring lock failure. House of the Red Wine, welcome on in. You think the land of the shadow is the land of the crucible, or where the crucible originated? So I would kind of have to agree to an extent that if the Erdtree was born here, that it would mean that the crucible kind of also started here. And, you know, there's a lot to be said about like the type of sap that's like coming out of the shadow tree, and whether or not that would be like where things got blended together. I think there could be a lot of compelling reasons to believe that, but we'll just have to wait and see. And yeah, if you guys aren't in the Discord, I just highly recommend checking it out. So like you've gotten like all of our live hot takes when the DLC trailer arrived. Because when I saw on like the Japanese website that like this is the land where like America first alighted and like where the Erdtree was born, I was like, oh man, seems quite Crucible-esque in nature. Hey, Kent Martin, welcome in. Thank you for catching me live. Yeah, and I know the Lion Dancer is supposed to be one of the ancient interviews, as Future Warrior is saying right here, which is why I'm really curious about like the horns and stuff. And that reminds me that like one thing that I wanted to mention about the horns is that you can kind of also see these on the Banished Knight armaments. And although Dark Souls 3 is obviously its own game, there is kind of like a through line between like dragon horns being like ancient or prehistoric and kind of like existing on certain types of armor sets. So I wonder if that's kind of a shared thematic element that's going on with here because of everything. So my question is, are these horns specifically like own things, or do they like predate them? Is this a Crucible thing? Do I need to like have an adjustment? There's a very like strong possibility for that. I'm always open to being wrong. It just sucks when it happens, but you know, it sucks to suck. You look forward to losing your mind and trying to figure it out, don't we all? Scalise says the new power system would be card-based and Mesmer has the Millennium Eye. Okay, now I see what you're saying with your other comment there. Okay. Going back to the video now, and I'm going to hydrate real quick. All right, so this is one of the things that I wanted to point out the most, although this is kind of like a really funny screen cap of it. So right here we have like what I would always call like the Chloranthy chrysanthemum style design that you can see throughout many FromSoft games. Like that shows up in Dark Souls 3 quite a bit. Shows up in Archdragon Peak, Consumed King Osiris's Garden. Does this show up elsewhere? I think it might show up. I would need to double check. Anyway, it shows up in DS3. It shows up in quite a few places in Elden Ring. Like it'll show up on like the high road, as I call it, that extends from like Leyndell to Raya Lucaria. You can find this design within Leyndell in the Erdtree Sanctuary, it appears. And I think it's supposed to like signify royalty and all that, just in general, because it's kind of similar to the Royal Seal of Japan. Which I've shown off on stream like many times before. And then for this to show up here, oh, I forgot to say that it also shows up in Farum Azula. So for this to show up here, I think it will add nicely to my collection. Although I do like that this version specifically has a bit more color in its tile design. So like the red to like help accentuate it. So this seems to be maybe more like official than even the Leyndell chrysanthemum or the Farum Azula version of it. And then, of course, going back to our little pinwheel analogy of three men in a trench coat. Oh yeah, I should probably elaborate that. Pinwheel is like Japanese name is like three dudes in a trench coat, essentially. Not like quite that, what's the word? Nonchalant about it, but close enough. Blue Dancer gear has some lore significance? Maybe. It seems like they've been trying to do a pretty good job of like showing off the starting classes, but I do think this will become more relevant, especially later on in the trailer. Future Warrior asks, what are the chances we may run into Godwyn as an optional boss? He's one of the demigods you're most curious about. That is a really good question, and I think a lot of that really depends on what the nature of the Shadowlands are, because if we take the idea that this is the spirit world and Godwyn is soulless, we can ask ourselves whether or not Godwyn's soul was destroyed or whether or not it was forcibly like banished and exiled, essentially. And if it's the case, then I think he could kind of show up to some degree here. Maybe he's Mesmer. Not really. I don't really believe that, but you never know. So I think the chances are low, but I will definitely say they are not zero. All the classes they show say they come from Vorlands in the item descriptions, maybe. Okay, so this right here is something else I wanted to point out, that it looks like we've got like a big towering castle nearby. We've also got these kind of trees that are going to be a bit more relevant, I think, later on. This looks like a different sword dude. And then we got the tapestries. Okay. So yeah, the Chloranthy style design. So this is very, very fascinating to me because this is kind of reminiscent of Deathblight Breath. I don't think it is the same, but who knows? This is the most bewildering part because we have lightning, and if these dudes are supposed to be from a time period predating the Erdtree, it's curious that they have yellow lightning rather than red lightning specifically. Although they might not have like much faith in the dragons, I guess. So this could like, I don't know. So yeah, this is just super cool to me. Like the lion dancer's mouth is open. He like grabs the lightning. Or I guess he doesn't necessarily. Oh, he kind of does. So this is why I think there's three dudes. So we've got the dude up front, then I think like a dude in the middle, and then the dude on the bottom. Maybe there's only two. I don't know.
Mother, wouldst thou truly lordship sanction in one so bereft of light?
So this is some very interesting dialogue because he says, wouldst thou sanction lordship to someone so bereft of light? That's obviously like a reference to like grace. So we don't have grace. So at the very least that shows like Mesmer is familiar with grace to some extent, but he seems unfamiliar with those who are bereft of it. Or maybe that, no, I shouldn't have said it that way. He doesn't seem to place faith in the Tarnished. So there's like the possibility that Mesmer could have been sent to the Shadowlands before the Tarnished were tarnished, or he could have already encountered the Tarnished and think that they're like, they ain't nothing, and so he doesn't really give a damn, and like he doesn't believe in them because he's seen like firsthand that they're kind of all not it, and so like we might prove to be the exception to that rule. But anyway, setting that aside, there's just so much to unpack with Mesmer between the snakes and the kind of like pseudo draconic wing, bat wing, whatever you want to call it, and then his flame alone. So in the background here, we've got a statue of a woman cradling a child. This looks like America with unstated baby, which could be Mesmer for all we know. He could be the firstborn. But many people don't necessarily believe he would be the firstborn because he is red of hair, which could imply that he would be born of Radagon, because most of Radagon's children are also red-headed stepchildren, with the exception of Mikola, who's blonde like Marika. Seems nowadays no one has faith in the Tarnished. Yeah. Did Miyazaki describe Mesmer as a hero in the Famitsu interview? I don't actually know. It doesn't ring a bell, so maybe not. You think this was the place the Tarnished were sent by America to die? Maybe. If so, that'd be pretty cool. Maybe. Yeah, that's a good idea. Hey, Chadwick Dillon. Nice to see you again. Glass shards reflect light but have no value on their own as they produce no light of their own, that kind of thing. Oh, so are you saying like that in relation to like the Tarnished being bereft of light? Maybe. I don't know. Do you think the tail end of the spear looks like the Fire Guardian symbol? Kind of. It does kind of look somewhat similar to the type of I don't want to call it like a talisman, but like on the let me pull up a picture. What did I even title this? Oh, okay. I don't think it's a one-to-one match, obviously, but it does kind of remind me of like the Fire Monk circlets, or whatever you want to call these. You can kind of also see these in the Lift of Rolled. So anyway. Miyazaki said something like these guys are fallen heroes. I would need to double check. You don't think the Badlands and the Shadowlands are the same thing? Yeah, that would actually be kind of really funny. And it might make a lot of sense if that's the way that Godfrey's Horaloo got killed outside the Lands Between. If he got killed by Mesmer. Because that's like something that's always really funny to me. Like when you have like a super badass character in a work of fiction who winds up in a place that seems like contrary to their character. So like in Berserk you have like the really big muscular dude like in prison. It's like, but he can just beat the hell out of literally anybody. He can like low diff 98% of the cast of Berserk, but you know he's just in prison like towards the beginning of the manga for whatever reason. It's like, who the hell put him in prison is my question. So yeah, like one question that I have is like, who the hell killed Horaloo? That obviously doesn't look like one individual with like the way that like he and Sarash are like impaled like multiple times over. But anyway. Oh yeah, each demigod has a heroic concept and Mesmer is said to be the same. So right. I think that just depends on like the way that you would interpret hero. So I think typically when we talk about heroes in the context of video games, that makes them sound more like protagonists to some degree, which isn't like necessarily unfair to call him a hero, but it could like set up some expectations which might not roll off the tongue. I just said that poorly. It might just like establish some expectations which shouldn't be established. But yeah, I think in the past like these dudes had like heroic qualities, maybe more in like the Greek sense, where like they aren't necessarily of good characters themselves, but they're just like super powerful or super intelligent or like have certain powers which people would like aspire to have, or like something along those lines. And of course like a lot of this stuff could have gotten corrupted over like the history of the Lands Between and the Shadows and whatnot. But yeah, Kuka Lane situation, yeah, one person versus an army. Hey Imar, welcome back in. There's a lot of coincidences between the image of Mesmer and the abductor virgins. Interesting, yeah. I don't know why I didn't think about the abductor virgins cradling the child, especially with this statue in mind. Your thoughts on the Mesmer is actually that Mesmer is America's first child when she first became a god, subscribing to the theory that Radagon was created when America became said god. Yeah, the whole situation with America and Radagon, there's a lot to work with there, to say the least. Alright, so yeah, going back to like Mesmer's design, his flame is very fascinating because this shows us that there are other flames beyond like the Flame of Ruin, Destined Death, Ghost Flame, Frenzied Flame, etc. But his flames are also black and red, which is kind of similar to that of Destined Death, which is, you know, super problematic for multiple reasons. Alright, and this is what I wanted to point out before. He has like really long sharpened nails that are almost claw-like. His hand is also kind of, I don't want to say like primitive, but like his thumb is like the same length. Maybe this is an angle thing, but it doesn't really look like it. Oh, maybe it is an angle thing, but like his thumb is like super long, which almost makes him seem like primitive? I can't think of a better word for it. Like almost like a monkey. Yeah, so that's pretty much it for Mesmer, I think. Oh yeah, there's a lot to talk about with like the snakes and whatnot. We can leave that alone. I think the really cool thing that's really hard to notice is the statue. Especially that it's like creating a child. Oh yeah. And I almost forgot like one of the most important things. So he's got like this black obsidian jewel on his spear, which kind of also looks like flames, which is kind of similar to like the Moog thing going on. So we've got like blood flame stuff going on, black flame, literal black stuff coming out of his flame. It's just so much to deal with there. Now, what did I say that obsidian looked like? Was this supposed to be the Godslayer Greatsword, which is kind of like... Okay, so the Godslayer seal is kind of similar to that, as far as like having the obsidian, as well as the Godslayer Greatsword. So yeah, like if I flipped this image... I don't think I could just flip it. Anyway, it would look very, very similar to that. But that could just be coincidence. Who knows? He's got that lankiness to him like a godskin apostle. Oh no, he's gonna get, like become super fat and roll everyone over. Hey Corbett, nice to see you again. Think I might have a little bit too much gain on the mic? Okay, well, thank you for letting me know, because I could potentially turn that down a bit. Let me go into my settings real quick. Alright, how is that? I mean, obviously not enough of a sample size, but hopefully that's a little bit better. Sounds a little zesty. Okay. Oh yeah, and then of course, I didn't even mention his eye. So we don't really see what's going on with his left eye. It looks like it's closed, which, you know, sets off a lot of alarm bells because of like everything between like Melina, Ronnie, all that nonsense. So his pupil is kind of like slitted like a serpent's, which is, you know, another big thing to try to contest and like deal with, because everything relating to the serpent said that in the English that they betrayed the Erdtree. The Japanese isn't quite as closed off in its interpretations, and that like it's more like the snake was a rebel to the Erdtree, which doesn't necessarily imply that like snakes were on the same forces as the Erdtree. So there is a bit more ambiguity there. And of course his eye is also super golden, and if he's a demigod, that also raises the question whether or not he is immortal because of like Destined Death's removal, or like what's going on with his eye. Is he like filled with grace? Is he kind of like the Tarnished, but, you know, just better and not actually tarnished? We don't really know. Dragon Communion Eye and the armor very reminiscent of the Drake Knight set. Yes. So he's also got like chainmail. So his mail right here is kind of also similar to Godfrey's, although Godfrey doesn't wear like a ton of armor, so it's kind of like hard to piece that together. The scales here are kind of similar, believe it or not, to the Elden Lord set. His whole visual design is a hodgepodge, yeah. Okay, so that was that. Now this is cool because it looks like we've got some omen horns coming off these candlestick-bearing ladies. And, oh, we've got some, like, coffins, which might be related to the ones that we get in the Lands Between. We've got this door back here, which is really weird to me. So where does this go? Oh, that might go to like a catacomb or something, now that I think about it. So anyway, these things are holding candlesticks, which look like they might have skulls at the bottom. But I think when you look at the other ones, they don't really turn out to be skulls. Like at first I thought it could be a skull and could be related to the old dude, because they almost seem to be like made out of like amber that's been crystallized or something like that. The fact that they're kind of like holding a candle tree style design is very fascinating to me. So these things are kind of reminiscent of the jailer witches in Irithyll in Dark Souls 3, which is, I'm a little bit terrified of what they could potentially do with these torches, candlesticks, whatever you want to call them. And they're also kind of reminiscent of our, not Irithylians, what are they called in Dark Souls 1? Our bloatheads from Ulasylians. So they do be breathing a little bit of fire with their candlesticks. And then, looks like there's just like a ridge up here. So this might be repurposed. So we got a graveyard here. Another candle lady. And yeah, just like the statures of these ladies or figures is just kind of different from the other types of enemies we've seen so far. The music slaps, gives you Slave Knight Gale vibes. Oh yeah, Juan brings up a good point that for Mikola in the cocoon, he has a ring on his finger that has like two snakes embracing or like meeting together, kind of like, I don't want to call it an Ouroboros because they're not like eating each other, but yeah, I'm pretty sure I have a good screenshot of the ring. Or if not, I'm certain I have footage of it. Oh, duh. Why did I look up ring in a game called Elden Ring? Probably Mikola would be faster. So maybe there's more than one snake, or maybe there's more than two snakes. So they do kind of have like a really cool like Celtic design almost, with like the way they get knotted together, but they're not necessarily eating their own tails, so it's not quite an Ouroboros. So I don't really know what to call it, but yeah. It's more like the symbol on the Nox chairs. The town covered up in cloth is wild. Yeah. So I'm really, really curious about this cloth. I wondered if it was similar to the type of cloth that you'd see in Farum Azula, but it does look different. We've got some more of like the coiled style design and like some of the candles. I don't know what to call these, like pottery, not pottery. Anyway, metalwork. And this area is similar to an Everjail, but it's obviously not. And so we get our first like throwing knife style weapon, which is really cool. That's not just like a kukri or throwing knife. And so this thing is really interesting to me because he's wielding a misbegotten cleaver, but he's not a misbegotten himself. But he looks like he could potentially be like something the misbegotten came from. It's really strange. So these got like the nightmare mist that you'd almost see like in Bloodborne. So he's like a spectral boy, which I mean, go figure. Now the most interesting thing to me about these dudes so far is they've got like these little thorn-like what are they called? Bracelets and anklets. And is he supposed to be a guilty boy? I don't necessarily think so, but yeah, he's just kind of like a weird looking dude. Yeah, the fact that he has the misbegotten cleaver is just kind of wild to me. Hey, Dwarf Chad, welcome on in. The pink mist is very Trina-esque. Are you talking about with our Roderica impersonator right here, or? Yeah, probably. Okay. Oh, yeah. So, I think this area might be in one of the first sections of the map that we saw earlier, just because like the spires, and this might be the tower that I pointed out way earlier, but It's kind of hard to say, really. Or maybe that thing is. Anyway, so this thing is really cool because we got a bunch of like purple butterflies and like a kind of pinkish purplish mist. So like even the butterflies themselves seem to be like pink on one side and more purple on the other. But this is where we get to see some of those weird lion statues that I was talking about earlier with like the omen horns, which is just very strange. And so we have a better view of some of the trees here, which I think lines up with some of the other places we've seen so far. Or it could just be like a repeating design element. So we get some like towers and whatnot in the background. And so this is one of the most fascinating things to me, because like this tree kind of resembles the two fingers to me. I don't necessarily believe that, but that was just kind of like my knee-jerk reaction when I first saw this. I was like, oh my god, is this like what the two fingers originated from? But like, if so, it doesn't really explain like the continued growths beyond. I've wondered whether or not this is supposed to be a crossed tree, because we do have a reference to like a tree like that in, hold on, let me pull up the icon for it. Dude, I don't know why, but like my Windows search has not been functioning properly. Okay. So we have the cross tree tower shield, which is endlessly fascinating to me because let's pull up our thing here. All right, let me pull this up for you guys. So, an iron great shield large enough to cover the entire body, emblazoned with an old interleaving tree. Great shields boast high damage negation and guard capacity, blah, blah, blah. So, this kind of design appears on multiple things, but the most fascinating part to me of it is like this tree seems to be almost growing from a flame, and I don't necessarily know if this is connected to what we have going on in the video, but it is just something that I thought of as like I looked at it. So right, hey Waste of Flesh, welcome on in. The candle tree design can be found on a shield found at a very interesting cave in the mountaintops where you find the Veil Talisman. The sheet looks interesting. Would you mind sharing it? So, hold on. Let me see if I have the link handy. So what I did was I took Evie's sheet. Let me post a link for you guys in chat. So this is where I got my spreadsheet information, just like for easy formatting purposes. So if you go to Evie's, oh yeah, I should probably actually show you guys what I'm looking at, huh? If I go to Evie's Elden Ring dynamic text differences comparison sheet, I can compare the different languages side by side. So if I choose like English, and then the Japanese version of like 1.0 versus like retail 1.07 versus the closed network text, and then do click to create a copy, it'll populate all the info that I need. So this is kind of where my information comes from, at least for that spreadsheet specifically. And so this one actually is more complete than what I use, because I just use it for like the English and Japanese. So I would recommend just using Evie's, and then I just formatted mine to like be in dark mode essentially, because why look at a light bulb? All right, let me pull chat back up. Access denied from Evie sheet? Why do I have access then? I shouldn't. Maybe you need to be logged in. Let me try it on a different browser. Huh. Very confusing. Okay, I'll look into that more off stream if you guys need a resource like that. But okay, but anyway, let me pull up. If you need a text dump, I would recommend using the Carian archives instead, if you don't have access to the EV sheet. So this is a text dump of the game, which I was using a lot more before I got the comparisons like directly like that. So if you want the Japanese for this, you just type in JP at the end of this link for the Carian archives. I should probably just pull this up for you guys. So you master, you just do like master JP at the end, capital J, get capital P. And then I would like look up the specific IDs for the text and just compare the two. So if you ever need a text dump to just I never requested access though, so it's just kind of strange to me. Alright, Future Warrior, thank you so much for joining. You have a good one, and take care. Oh yeah. So her spell is really interesting because obviously it's a new spell. It seems like it has a huge AoE, but I don't know if it actually does damage or if it just like disorients things, Mortal Kombat style. Finish him. And so this place seems kind of high up relative to the Shadow Tree, and maybe this is the tower that I was talking about earlier, or maybe it's just further on. Okay, so this is the dude that was like kind of next to the Mikola rune that I talked about way earlier in the stream. And in the background, I can't exactly make out what's going on with the sigil. You can kind of see it elsewhere. I think this is supposed to be Mikola's, maybe not. Oh yeah, you can see it like on here a little bit, very, very briefly. So yeah, it appears on this flag as well, although it's just kind of hard to make out. It looks almost like a cross or like a leaf or something like that. So anyway, this dude was like kind of next to Mikola's rune from earlier. He's got the twin blade that you will see the Tarnished wield against Mesmer, I believe. Later on, he's got like the kind of old knight. Wait, no, this is a different dude. The helmet is different. I'm lying. I take back everything I said. So I don't know if this is like a new throwable pot or something, but yeah, this is different. This view here. So it looks like we got like a Parthenon style thing going on up here to the top left. And yeah, this area I think would be kind of close to the Wicker Man. But I don't know if this is like a little bit of camera trickery or if the Wicker Man is like further down to the left. This area would be further off to the west, or like to the left with like the very, very first pictures we saw of the lands between, or the Shadowlands. And these dudes have like a kind of similar circle type thing on the knight that we just saw a moment ago, but they might not be affiliated.
I presume you.
Now this area is very fascinating to me because the trees are all green, and that's actually really rare for the lands between, because you only really get green trees in areas that have like water, like the actual water areas of Liurnia. Otherwise, all of the foliage is yellow or orange to some degree. Bye, Howdy. You have a good night, man. It's almost like you can see the Erdtree on the other side of the veil. Kinda. Oh, yeah. So you'll see more of this a little bit later on. The veil thing. And then this dude's armor seems completely fresh and new. He has a new badass crossbow. Just looks like it's going to be ass to deal with in PvP. So this is really captured a lot of people's imaginations because it looks like a rune bear. It's like crucibleized with like the red hair and like the goofy looking, not omen horns, more like budding horn type thing. And it almost looks like there's like a church up here, and I think like the way that the land is designed right here, this is either like the kind of like the equivalent of like where Liurnia would be, relatively speaking, with like the position of the sun, or yeah, I don't know. almost like the precipice of anticipation should be over here, like somewhere. Like not like literally, I'm just saying like in terms of like where the lighting is and like the continent of like the lands between. So now we get to some of the most fascinating stuff so far in the trailer. So in this field of blue, we've got our dancer in red. We'll see more of her in a moment. Way out here in the background, we've got some of like the whistling Godgrave style tombstones here, but these are like covered with a bunch of also like smaller ones that which you can see in like the consecrated snowfield, and maybe that's fitting because this area is blue and whatnot, so maybe there's supposed to be like ties that way. You don't really see blue anywhere in like the lands between, not like this, so this is very different. It's next to like a body of water, kind of, maybe an ocean over here, but way back here we've got what looks to be like a giant ship, and that might be kind of reminiscent of the types of ships that you can see in the steles in the underground areas. Let me see. Okay. So in the Ul areas of the game, so this might be like this. Oh, it looks like these are supposed to have like dragons on top or something like that. So one question that many fans have is this supposed to like to depict the arrival of the Newman on the Ul dynasty like steles and whatnot, the relief sculptures? Maybe. And so if the Newman arrived, or if the portrayal of the Newman's arrival was like shown on those, is that what this is supposed to be? Did the Newman arrive here first? We're told not America, auto captions will actually get that one right for once. We're told that America first alighted here in the Shadowlands, so it seems possible that these events could line up. So this is just really cool, and I think there's like 3 of them. I don't know what this is. This might be a ship, this might be something else. It's kind of hard to say. And then I think there's another one off to the left. Rune bears are bad enough. No, now you have to have rune bears shoot lightning at you. Vast majority of base game armor didn't consist of full plate mail. True. To it says, because there's so many cliffs, you feel like these lands were scooped out of the main lands between and just dropped into here. I think even like the lands between itself has a lot of that going on, to be honest. Like Liurnia is pretty bad about it. Gelmer is canonically said to have like shifted a lot more after the shattering, but yeah, you might be right about that. Shut up, less from soft, hear me. So this is really cool because she's like spinning around almost like she has like the flowing swords equipped. She seems to have like curved swords that we don't have yet. And obviously the way that she's flowing around is very reminiscent of like the blue flowing swordsman. So one thing myself and others have wondered is whether or not like the whole swordsman in blue type thing is just kind of like a misrepresentation of like previous events. Was it really like a woman? Was she in red? And did the story get changed over time? We don't really know. Is she of the same people as the blue flowing swordsman? Seems very likely, but yeah. And now this dude is, or lady, this person is really interesting because obviously they're mounted, and that's not even like what interests me so much. Is like they have like an actual lance that they're wielding, and it has like gravity lightning going on because it's purple. So setting that aside, this almost looks like it could be like near the base of the shadow tree, but I'm not entirely sure, which, you know, it's whatever. But like we've got like a bunch of the pine trees, which are kind of reminiscent of like what you go out have like in the lands between, and they're all like more orange and reddish and like brown because they're like dying and whatnot. Who knows? And then we've got like some of the circular type. I can't call these flags standards going on in the background, and then it's like boar type thing is not this hippo. But man, this hippo thing is super cool because like the way that it just sprouts a bunch of foliage, for lack of a better term, from its back, I think is kind of reminiscent of what most people would associate with like the crucible style incantations. You can definitely get this as an incantation as the Tarnished. We've seen the art for it, and I think these kind of trees are kind of reminiscent of what you'd see in the Dark Moon Greatsword. And speaking of which, we have a Dark Moon in the back. I don't think that's actually the Dark Moon. It might just be like the regular moon, but who knows? And then this thing is also shooting out a bunch of projectiles, Elden Stars style. So, if you want to believe this land is connected to the Crucible, I think this is like one of the like biggest pieces of evidence to support that kind of theory. Mounted units with lances hype. Yeah, I'm kind of hoping that they'll add in like some more like what's its face, torrent customization options, because that'll just break everybody's minds and really turn it into the S tier DLC that it deserves to be. But if there's no torrent customization, we riot. No. You want the Boar Rider set? Oh, yeah. And then the other thing that I did want to say about that Boar Rider is that it kind of reminds me of the Champion set, almost. Like, not really, but kind of, just like the way that it's so extra. Was there anything else about the boar? Can't think of it. Okay, so definitely not a tree, just a bunch of rocks right there. So this thing is very, very cool, yeah, so this seems to be like an underground area. We have no idea what kind of thing this is. I have honestly wondered if this is supposed to be a turtle. So you've heard of Turtle Pope, now what about Turtle Grim Reaper? And the fact that it's like riding a horse is just kind of wild. And then it's got like some human drag style head and eyes going on. You excited to get a boomerang weapon? Alright, so this is the dude from the painting that we pointed out way earlier. Well, most likely. And the reason why I say that is because this medallion is kind of like a one-to-one direct rip of what our boy was wearing earlier. Oh, did I must have skipped... I must have skipped a bit because I totally don't remember talking about these two. I'll need to like go back. Oh yeah, I think I like looked away at chat for like a brief second and then they were gone. Okay, so yeah, this medallion is more or less like the exact same thing that we get off of our dude, which might like TOS us. Yeah, I know a lot of content creators are worried about this like cutscene. They're like, oh no, we're gonna get demonetized. Well, rip. That's what happens. So anyway, this is so fascinating to me because while on one hand he kind of does look impaled, on the other hand it almost looks like these like do function as like part of his like body. So was this dude a vessel for an Elden Ring? Is this amber? Is this part rune? We don't know. There's just like a lot of possibilities. I wondered if like the candle bearing ladies were like essentially holding on to the same stuff, although they kind of like look different. Anyway, let's go back. Okay, there we go. So I really don't know what to make of this. The kind of mask kind of reminds me of the Zamorians because of like the gray hair and everything, and they seem to be like long and lanky. But all of them like falling asleep in like a purple laden field of flowers kind of feels like Mikola style magic almost. And then coming into here is very reminiscent of the Karian study hall, or even like Karia to some degree. And her hat is kind of reminiscent of what you would see on like the Abbess style hats in the Lift of Dectus, but it doesn't fit exactly. I would like to get a better look at the front of this because it reminds me of something, but I haven't put my finger on what exactly. And the chair design I haven't like placed together, nor have I been able to piece together what exactly is on her smock, her dress, whatever you want to call it. And She's very fascinating because she obviously seems to be like a kind of regal style figure, just like the way she's positioned, looking down from like a throne. People have wondered whether or not she's the Glowmite Queen, because I mean, who isn't the Glowmite Queen at this point? But yeah, potentially related to the Carians, the astrologers, the Nox. We don't really know. Maybe the Erdtree grows from humans? Maybe, especially with the way like Melina can kind of like spawn a pseudo Erdtree if she gets defeated by Morgott while summoned for his fight. Night Cavalry comes from the Land of Shadows? That would be cool. And I guess that could make sense because like Morgott, if like the Omen are kind of in the Land of Shadows, that could potentially fit, yeah. That looks like Crucible Knight armor ridges to you? It looks like the figure you put in the study hall to invert it. Yeah, maybe that's it. I'm pretty sure I do have a statue picture of that. Carian? Maybe I don't. I skipped the cutscene. Why did I do that? I know I have the cutscene somewhere. Oh. The video right before it. I think I did it twice. So yeah, I guess I don't have a good angle of her, but you can see a kind of statue exactly like this in the Church of the Cuckoo when you first walk into Liurnia. So if anybody wants like a closer look at that, I don't think I have a good close-up of it like labeled. I'm pretty sure I have footage or a screenshot of it somewhere, but anyway. So you think like the... Hold on, let me... Where's my... Oh, because I was using VLC. Damn it.
Your fellow blood must...
So you think this stuff is reminiscent of the Crucible Knights, or like this stuff? I could see that. Oh yeah, that might have been it. I was thinking like Siluria's tree, maybe. Yeah, it's just like one of those weird things. And then like her collar is kind of wild and out there and kind of reminded me of some like Godskin stuff. Oh no, it wasn't the Godskin specifically. It was the Dominula ladies. Festival? Okay, yeah, that's what this kind of reminded me of. Like this almost, but like upside down. And then like, yeah, okay. That doesn't fit. That's just kind of what came to mind when I first saw it. If it's old enough, it could be Crucible imagery for sure. Maybe, I don't know. Okay. Let's go back to our old dude. So yeah, he starts to pull that out and like it goes with his body, but it seems to like be going through him rather than actually being fully part of him. And since he's been impaled, it's a question of whether like Mesmer did it or like how this all happened. And so we have our Vargrim cosplayer. And they seem to have like the dueling shield on as well as a twin blade. And so Mesmer does his flame style attack.
Come now. Touch the withered arm.
Get grabbed.
And to the realm of shadow.
So here we go. This is like a Crucible style Ash of War, if you want to call it that. So like kind of the equivalent of Siluria's Woe or Ordovis's Vortex. I think that was called Vortex. Either way, they're both like Vortex in Japanese. And this is almost like when the Crucible Knights gain their wings, Axe Knights specifically, and then do that. So if so, that seems to be a skill tied to the shield, because we're not using a catalyst or a seal to cast it right now. And then this reminds me of something. Is it like the Alabaster Swords? Kind of. Anyway.
May we meet again. May we meet again.
Those stripped of the grace of gold shall all meet death.
Those stripped of the grace of gold shall all meet death. So that's kind of interesting because, as somebody pointed out in the chat earlier, that could tie into like Marika banishing the Tarnished to die. Maybe they're all sent here. Maybe Mesmer is part of that plan. We don't really know. The reason why I said this was like a Crucible Knight shield type thing is just because it's in the left hand. So unless this has like a no skill attached to it, it's most likely the shield skill as opposed to this thing. So anyway, you're gonna laugh if the DLC is a roguelite mode. Scott Leasy says he wields the flame of ambition. Well, Morgott needs to snuff him out.
Those stripped of the grace of gold shall all meet death. In the embrace of Mesmer's flame.
In the embrace of Mesmer's flesh? Or did he say flame? It's kind of hard. I wish I do have like the subtitles on for this.
Touch the withered arm and travel to the realm of shadow.
Touch the withered arm and travel to the realm of shadow. So it's essentially the shadow realm. Got it. It's going to be really funny to talk about. And that kind of like confirms more or less the whole theory that you'll need to go through the Michelin cocoon to get here.
I will not be far behind. May we meet again.
And we don't necessarily know who's talking there. The voice sounds feminine, which means it could be Mikola or it could be another NPCs. I think it most likely means it's going to be Mikola because they're not going to be far behind and we're supposed to like follow Mikola and like the traces he left, I guess. But anyway, Shadow of the Erdtree. I should double check the kanji for Shadow of the Erdtree. I think it's just shadow and doesn't necessarily imply eclipse, but it might. I should, yeah, anyway. Or maybe even if it is shadow, I might want to compare it to like Gwendolyn. Either way, anyway. I've heard some like pretty wild theories as to whom this is supposed to be, but I'm pretty confident this is supposed to be Mikola. Like when we first get transported into the Shadow Realm. So, okay, this is something we talked about earlier, that you think you could see the Erdtree through the veil. So you can kind of see this design coming out of the Erdtree even as it is in like the Lands Between. It's really hard to make out. You kind of almost need the camera mod to see it, which is really annoying. But at the top of the Erdtree, you do get this kind of like silvery veins and whatnot, and that might tie into this tree. And this secondary tree almost looks like it's a person embracing or cradling this first tree or trying to like snuff it out. So I'm certain there's going to be a lot to go with this. Like, was the original Erdtree a crossed tree? I think there's a very strong possibility. Was there a tree that predated the Erdtree? Potentially. Do I think that's the Great Tree? No, I think that's like a different thing. But yeah, that's kind of like its own subject right there. Putting out a McKellen video before the DLC comes out is going to be a challenge. Good luck, man. What have I heard? Oh, some people are like, oh, that's Marika when she like becomes a god. Some people like think this is what you see at the end of the DLC, which, you know, might be the case. But I think this is supposed to be like the intro. So Shadow of the Erdtree. Now, like, what he's holding here is like his flame. It looks really cool. And then you can kind of like make out some more of like what's going on in the background. So, I, 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 Yeah, I don't really know what else I want to talk about. Like, so we could potentially place like some of them. So I think where we saw the Roderica style girl might be like around here. You saw the Parthenon thing like elsewhere, but from the vantage in game, you didn't see like the Blackstone tile style pillars going along with it. So I'm really curious what this is going to end up being in the final build, and then like the broken bridges and whatnot. So, Ring of Mikola. So this is why I think the rune that we saw earlier should potentially be Mikola's rune, even though like this one's kind of closed. It just seems to be similar to that. So that's pretty much that for like the first analysis of the trailer so far. Maybe IGN will point out some stuff that I haven't, hopefully. And then... oh, yeah, this might be some of the LOD stuff. Like the trees are like kind of goofy looking, janky. So yeah, it's kind of fun trying to like place where the things are. I would almost assume like the goofy swamp style house with the painting after it might be like over here, like down here somewhere, but who knows. And then this chapel might be where like we saw the rune bear, so it could have been like coming from this angle, like looking back this way. That might be the McKellen rune right here. Seems like a valley almost. Oh yeah, and I don't remember if I said it, but when like the potential turtle horseman thing just kind of like shows that there's probably going to be a robust underground area as well. Although I could be wrong about that. So I think that's it for me for right now at least. So unless you guys have something else you want to like bring up real quick, I think I'll call that one there and then like look at the IGN video and then Ratatosker one. Am I going to buy the life-size Millennia prosthetic? It's only $350 to $450. No, I've got 2 working arms right now. Man, I really like dropped the ball to like make an arm and a leg joke right there, didn't I? Is this my first time watching the trailer? No, I've watched it a lot, but I was trying to finish my other video before, like when the trailer first dropped, so I just kind of like missed out on the hype, and some people wanted to like, you know, get my thoughts on it, so that's kind of why we're looking at it today. What do I think about Ronnie theory? Could you elaborate? And also welcome into the stream, Jack Irish. You think there would be a whetstone for the missing elements? That'd be really cool. I kind of really wish that they add more buffs to like make it a bit more, I don't want to say like balanced, but like comparable between like the buff times, because like I think it's really cool to have like the black flame buff, but it only lasts like 5 to 9 seconds, which is just kind of garbage. It's not worth it. Oh, you think the Karian inverted statue depicts Ronnie? I don't know. Like, I don't think so. Just because it feels like there might have been like some upside down stuff with the Nox, and I assume that would like predate Ronnie as well. Look at the map icon for the Eternal Cities. I would need to like double check those. I don't remember what they look like off the top of my head. Do I think the Civil War of the Shattering was excluded in the Lands of the Shadow? I honestly don't know. It sounds like what's his face, Mesmer, might have some familiarity with the Tarnished. So if you want to call it the Civil War, maybe they were excluded, but it seems like they have kind of like their own war going on. So maybe yes, but no, but maybe they're related. Who knows, man? Oh, it's the same silhouette as the Karian statue? Really? I would need to double check that. Thanks for pointing that out. There's a theory that says Moog went to the Shadowlands and he emerged from Mikola's blood. He accessed the DLC from his arm, and the DLC is very omen focused. Teriyaki is cooking. Alright. So that's it. That's it for the trailer for right now. So that was about 40 minutes. If Mortis is still in the chat, you can give Smotown some slack, because my analysis lasted about 40 minutes as well. To be fair, I was bouncing a little bit off the chat, but whatever. Okay, so setting all that aside, let's go ahead and check out what IGN has to say with 15 hidden details in the Elden Ring Shadow of the Erdtree
The long
trailer.
wait is finally over. We now have our first look at the upcoming DLC for Elden Ring Shadow of the Erdtree, and it's looking absolutely massive. The 3-minute long trailer is packed with terrifying bosses, dazzling magic, and a whole lot that needs unpacking. So let's jump right into it.
I am Melania, Blade of Mikola.
The biggest mystery posed by Elden Ring's main campaign was what happened to Mikola, the twin brother of Melania and a demigod cursed to be a child for eternity. In the main game, Mikola was found in Mohg's palace slumbering in a cocoon that was meant to turn him into...
Do you guys think that's fair to say that it was like the biggest mystery? I feel like there's a lot of really big ones. Maybe it is the biggest, maybe it isn't. But anyway, it's just kind of like, I'm not trying to like nitpick them. I'm just like kind of curious how everyone feels, just because I don't know. I have so many questions about so many things. It's kind of hard to say like if there's anyone that's of like more important than the others. Who's Elden John? Yo, if there's a bleeding dragon or bleed dragon. Chadwick says IGN is for normies. That's actually exactly why I kind of wanted to watch this video, just because they might have like a better pulse on like a broader audience. So it's kind of good practice, at least for me, to just kind of get a better feel of what the normies, so to speak, are consuming.
an adult. During Mohg's boss fight, it's implied that Mikola is dead. However, cut lore dialogue reveals that Mikola is just still asleep. Along with
Global Sequence says, according to YouTube thumbnails, every mystery is the biggest mystery in Elden Ring. I mean, you gotta clickbait to get them views. It's all part of the game. Hey, Buster Suds, nice to see you again. You're gonna be way behind in the stream, but you miss listening? Ah, thanks. Welcome back in. However, like 45 minutes later, you managed to catch up. Uh-oh.
the first Shadow of the Erdtree key art showing Mikola on a spirit steed, it appears the stage is set to uncover the mystery behind this lost family member. The trailer begins with an image of Mikola's cocoon still placed on the altar of Mohg's palace. The corpse-like arm of Mikola is stretched out of the cocoon, seemingly showing that Mikola still hasn't been revived from his slumber. In past From Software games, the DLC is usually accessed directly in the game's world, whether by touching a painting or discovering a secret cave. Mikola's cocoon feels like a very likely entryway into the DLC, and sure enough, director Hidetaka Miyazaki confirmed this to be the case in our new interview with him. A voice at the end of the trailer also asks you to
touch the withered arm and travel to the realm of shadow.
The lore indicates that Mikola's soul may be in the land of dreams, so traveling into his mind may be the gateway to this realm of shadow. It all seems to be the perfect setup to access the new DLC areas.
So that's a little bit bold, but I mean, it's fine with me that they like said it in a way that is clear that it's speculation. So, you know, definitely going to give them a pass on that. To say that the realm of shadow is the realm of dreams, it might be true, but it's just kind of hard to say for now.
Erdtree, you shall burn.
The Erdtree is Elden Ring's most striking landmark, a giant golden tree towering over the lands between. The Erdtree represents the blessing of the Elden Ring, and its glow symbolizes the golden order established by Queen Marika. Depending on which ending of the main campaign players pursue, the Erdtree can look very different, as it represents the current state of the lands between and its ruler. But there is another great tree in Elden Ring. Technically several, but we're not going to get lost in the roots on that. The other great tree, one closely associated with Mikola, is the heaping tree, far in the north of the lands between where Melania resides. We have a suspicion that the
I wonder how like a great tree theory enjoyers felt about that line. They're probably like, that's not the great tree. Anyway,
tree in the trailer could well be the Erdtree. The Erdtree is based in Leyndell, but that city is not visible in this shot, and the twisted Y shape of the tree more closely resembles the Erdtree, which Mikula tried to grow as a sanctuary away from the Golden Order and the Erdtree. This could...
And there is kind of a bit of merit to that idea. Maybe I backed up too far.
In this shot, and the twisted...
Yeah, so this does kind of resemble the way that like the Erdtree is kind of also broken in half and like kind of like coiling in on itself. And so I could see that idea if like you think that Mikula is trying to usurp the Shadowlands for whatever like his purpose is, whether they be graceful or malign, to borrow a line. I just don't really have strong feelings about it just because I don't have enough info.
Y shape of the tree.
And hey, Tony Pepperoni and Emma Rizzi, welcome on in.
Mikula tried to grow as a sanctuary away from the Golden Order and the Erdtree. This could explain the DLC's name, Shadow of the Erdtree, perhaps a reference to Mikula's attempts and failure to grow a tree separate from the Erdtree. Whatever the true nature of this tree, it unfortunately appears dead and leaking a golden fluid. It's unclear why the tree is in this state, but we can expect the story of Shadow of the Erdtree to reveal just why it looks so unhealthy and the major impact of its status. While the Land of Dreams has been referenced in Elden Ring, it might not be an alternate dimension at all, but rather the Lands Between's past. From Software often utilizes time travel in its DLC.
So it's kind of funny because this one has been kind of outright confirmed to not be the case, at least with the Famitsu interview. So I wonder when exactly the IGN interview took place, especially in relation to the Famitsu one, because they were kind of released simultaneously, but that doesn't necessarily mean that they were done. And I don't believe IGN asked about that specifically, so it kind of makes sense that their info here might be a little bit off base.
Sending players back in time in the case of Dark Souls' Artorias of the Abyss, as well as the nightmare version of the past in the Old Hunters from Bloodborne. From Software also threw players into the future in Dark...
Yeah, and so... Do I really want to get on a Bloodborne rant right now?
Sending players back in time in the case of Dark Souls' Artorias of the Abyss, as well as the nightmare version of the past in the Old Hunters from Bloodborne.
Okay, he said nightmare version of the past. I can let that slide. Okay, yeah. That's good enough for me.
From Software also threw players into the future in Dark Souls 3's The Ring City. If this tendency is true from Elden Ring as well, if the Shadow of the Erdtree is set in the past, it could explain some additional details that appear later on in the trailer.
Yeah, Elder Gusto brings up a good point. With DS2, you enter the memories of the giants to access... Wait, that's part of the base game, isn't it? Because you don't go to the DLCs that way, but I mean, certainly time travel was an element of that game, if that's kind of what you're getting at.
A quick cut to some new characters, presumably and more importantly, some new armor players can potentially find in the DLC. The first is a knight armor vaguely reminiscent of the Carrion Knight set, with a cape and some kind of sharp crescent accent on top of the helmet. The next character is also in armor, wearing some kind of Roman legion-like set, but with a face-like helmet with a plume on top. Incidentally, many of the armor sets in Elden Ring that feature a plumed helmet motif belong to enemies who serve a particular demigod, like the Gelmir Knight set belonging to soldiers who serve Rykard, and the Godric Knight set. Could this armor belong to adherents of the mysterious demigod who appears later in the trailer? The final two characters are...
I don't think that's too likely, just because, well, the plume is a thing in those armors. We also don't see like any seals to go along with it. Oh yeah, and one thing about her sword is it is also kind of reminiscent of the weird medallion on our old boy, but they aren't like too reminiscent of each other. So anyway, yeah, I'm not the biggest fan of this just because we don't... Maybe she has like a sigil on her breast to show that off, but this kind of seems more unique than a standard foot soldiers wear, or even like a knight armor set.
Belong to adherents of the mysterious demigod who appears later in the trailer. The final two characters are another knight bent over a clay pot and a mysterious masked figure lying in a dark purple flower field.
Of the last queen of Caria, Renala of the Full Moon.
One of the factions in Elden Ring is the Carian royal family, led by Queen Renala, and their magical academy of Raya Lucaria. This new character, seated on a throne in an empty hall, certainly bears similarities with Renala. From
I feel like that one...
their pale face.
is pretty off. Like, I feel like this nose is quite different. Like, look at how much more hooked it is than hers, which, I mean, like, she doesn't really have like a super hooked nose, but it's quite different in my opinion. Yeah, the lips are also very different. And
to that extravagant outfit. But
like, honestly, like, my knee-jerk reaction was that doesn't make a lot of sense, but then I like pulled back for a second and it was thinking about, if you think about like Ronnie's weird dialogue with Renala's fight. Renala's fight is just super strange in general. It is something that I wish that like they address. Like, why does Ronnie's trap still trigger if you're like one of her confidants and all that? Anyway, if Renala is like sleeping throughout her fight and Ronnie doesn't want you to disturb her slumber, I could potentially see an argument being made that like the real essence of Renala should also be like in the dreamlands, if that's what you wanted to believe. But I don't think this one fully pans out.
if our
Maybe
theory that
Renala's
Erdtree
mom?
is
Maybe.
set in the past proves correct, then this figure could even be a young Renala herself. Elden Ring is ultimately a story about a feud between members of a noble family. Given that nobles love portraits of themselves, players can find paintings of these siblings all across Elden Ring, especially in Volcano Manor, where paintings of Rykard and Radahn can be found. We can add another portrait to the mix, this time of an old man seated with his hands on his laps and accompanied by a mysterious cloaked woman. Given that portraits in Elden Ring are reserved for noble or other prominent characters, we can assume that they are key figures in the lands between. If the DLC is set before the events of the main game, this would mean that several of the crumbling structures players encounter in the present-day timeline of Elden Ring could be assumed to be in better condition than the past. Is this imposing fortress what Farum Azula looks like before it crumbles? There are similar architectural elements, such as its heavy blockwork punctured by archways, as well.
So, yeah, I don't think this is a terrible idea if you don't have the information that the DLC is explicitly not set in the past, but that kind of just like puts a nail in the coffin for this one, unfortunately. And even beyond that, I don't think like a lot of the architectural elements really do line up one-to-one by any means. Like, the spiral columns are unique to this area, which you could say like, oh, well, that was earlier and they got destroyed. But then like all this other stuff, it just doesn't quite work out as neatly as I think it's presented here. Nemo, welcome on in. You said Ronnie's trap is probably just automatic and just triggers whenever Renala is disturbed. It can be set and be sprung. Ronnie doesn't control it. You're not wrong, but it is just kind of still a little bit disappointing to me. He just said the portrait guy is noble and called the job done. I think like the biggest thing that they're trying to say is like, not only is he noble, but because he's noble and has a portrait, that he's probably a key figure, which is kind of disappointing that he like didn't point out that the old dude is the old dude later on with like the whole impalement stuff going on. But yeah,
As well as a vortex above.
I kind of wish that they like had numbered these, because it might be a little bit easier, like put timestamps, because yeah.
Pulling the castle upwards, which we know is where Farum Azula ultimately ends up. A second fire giant boss? That's the only explanation after seeing this latest titan appear in the Shadow of the Erdtree trailer. Players are already familiar with fighting the fire giant, a hulking, massive boss capable of wielding fire. Now it appears we'll have to face some kind of living furnace, which Miyazaki told us is a terrible weapon of war filled with burning corpses. I hope it doesn't throw any of them at us.
How would anybody have missed that? That thing was a giant. Hidden details. Watching IGN just makes you angry. I feel that. Welcome back to the stream, Sarcastic.
I don't know what it is, I don't particularly want to find out, but it looks like there will be a brain-sucking enemy in the new Shadow of the Erdtree DLC. An enemy type that follows a rich history of awful creatures like the Mind Flayer in Demon Souls and Brainsucker in Bloodborne.
Mother,
I can't believe I missed that.
truly lordship sanction in one so bereft of life.
If there's a main character in the Shadow of the Erdtree trailer, it's this mysterious long-limbed demigod who Miyazaki confirmed will be called Mesmer. The crimson red hair is a dead giveaway that this character is likely a child of Radagon, but it's a mystery as to whether he's related to Malenia and Miquella through Queen Marika, or Radahn, Rykard, and Ranni through Queen Renala. This
I really wonder how people feel about that. And I don't remember how much I talked about it when I was looking at it, but yeah, if Mesmer really is Radagon and Marika's child, it does bring up a lot of questions about like the timeline of when he was sent to the Shadowlands and or when it got split from the Lands Between. So yeah, I think I only touched on it like briefly, but I didn't like go into like super depth in that. It would most likely have had to have happened after Godfrey's reign, and more likely when Radagon became Elden Lord than for like one of their children to be grown up enough to like go and be in this land, or at the very least it shows like if Mesmer is a child of Marika and Radagon, that it's most likely to have been after her period of time spent with Godfrey. But although with the dualism at hand with Marika and Radagon, who really knows? She could have like had Mesmer first, then gone and had like the Karian children. It's yeah, who really knows, man? Oh no, Santeria just brought up one of the cursed points. Maybe Mesmer impaled Marika. That's why he's there. So, oh yeah, I guess I didn't talk about the sigil at the end of the thing. I'll do that at the end of this video. So, yeah, maybe I'll leave that alone for now. No, I guess I already brought it up, so I shouldn't like tease you guys and like forget with my ADHD brain. Let's pull this back up. So one of the cursed points is that Miyazaki doesn't outright say that Mesmer is a demigod, whatever you want to call it, and he just says that he's like of the same status as the demigods. Now, why is this particularly problematic to old LP, you might ask? Well, you know who else is technically a demigod? Godfrey. So, if Mesmer is of the same status as the demigods and Godfrey is a demigod, could Mesmer have been a consort to Marika in the past? Maybe. It kind of sucks to say. And part of the reason why I bring that up is like this sigil in the background is kind of fascinating because we have what looks like what we could assume would be the flame of Mesmer on the left hand side of this sigil here, this crest. And this sigil is technically impaled. And this is like a what's called a heraldry type thing. And I'll talk about that a bit more. I'll need to pull up the Wikipedia article because this could relate into why he's called Mesmer the Impaler. And this braid right here is kind of a mystery. Some people believe that it could represent Mikola. I think this is likely to represent Marika and the braid that she has on her head. This braid also shows up in some other feature. Oh yeah. So this braid does kind of appear on like the, what are they called? The Erdtree soldiers' helmets, but I've also seen this elsewhere, which more closely tied it to Marika that I'm just like blanking on right now. So anyway, impalement as far as like Wikipedia goes, impalement for heraldry. So on the Dexter side, which would be the right hand side, as you're like wearing or holding a crest or coat of arms, would be the male side, which is what Baron represents, and the Sinister, aka the left side, as you wear it, would be the feminine side. And so if the right hand side as you're wearing it represents the male, and this is supposed to represent Mesmer's flame, and this is supposed to be the feminine side of impalement and represent his wife, his spouse's side, could represent Marika or whoever this braid is, whether that be Mikola, we don't really know. Maybe that's why Moog failed in his endeavors. Bedchamber was taken. So yeah, that's just kind of some cursed knowledge, because if he is a demigod and Godfrey's a demigod, that doesn't necessarily mean he couldn't have shacked up with America to some degree. So do with that information what you will. Don't pretend you don't see that Mesmer is America herself. Well, I mean, look at Radagon. Who's to say that the situation doesn't have to apply only once? Okay.
This character's snake motif makes me believe he's likely related to Riker, or perhaps even a younger version of the Lord of Blasphemy himself, before he fed himself to the Great Serpent. Remember, having multiple names in Elden Ring is not such an uncommon thing, particularly for the demigods and nobles. Miyazaki tells IGN that Mesmer is a key figure in the DLC, and he again has this important element of shadow to him, which is a key theme throughout the DLC as well. The key art features Mesmer on a throne similar to the one demigods sit on at the base of the Erdtree. Miyazaki says this is to show that Mesmer stands on equal footing to these other demigods and children of Marika, who sat around in these thrones and held the rooms of the Erdtree.
Alright, so that's the quote where he talks about them like being equal footing. So like, what demigods does he hold equal footing to? It's kind of a cursed question a little bit. They're just saying whatever they want. I mean, am I doing anything different? I'm just probably being a bit more grounded in my approach.
Partway through the trailer, we're teased with a variety of new weapons and potential gameplay enhancements, including something that looks like martial arts or some kind of pugilist skill set. There are also large bombs we can throw, as well as a huge repeater crossbow that looks pretty handy if we can get our hands on it.
Oh yeah, I forgot to point out the backward wielded blades, like the kicking stuff. It's all good though.
There is also a montage of terrifying looking new enemies, some of whom look like area bosses we can encounter in the wild. The swordswoman in the field could be another jail inhabitant, and there are shots of intimidating boar riders, a scary hippo, and a huge skeleton horseman. Towards the end of the trailer, we see a corpse pull a sword or some kind of fragment out through their skull. Fascinatingly, this character's bones protrude outward, reminiscent of the central section in the Elden Ring room, and the
So I don't actually think these are supposed to be his bones, as I like pointed out briefly. Like it like goes through him. It doesn't like really work like the same way that a spine would, and his quote-unquote bones weren't sticking out of him earlier like in the painting, and like he failed to like point that out, at least with this like little medallion type thing. But I do think there is a lot of visual similarity here.
While fighting Mesmer, the player character is shown to grow wings and launch a spear of light. This appears to be the aspect of the Crucible wing spell that the enemy Crucible Knights can perform, suggesting that it may finally be something players can cast in the DLC.
Dearest Mikola.
Good night, Elden Enthusiast. Thanks for sticking around.
You must abide alone a while.
The final shot is surely Mikola himself, considering the character's association with gold hair and pale skin. Whatever it is they're doing, the tree, whether that be the Halic tree, the Erdtree, or some other great tree, seems to be in much better shape than it was at the beginning of the trailer, when it looked quite rotted and sick. Is Mikola perhaps responsible for
it's okay, whatever.
its restoration? We'll find out when Shadow of the Erdtree releases on June 21st. For more on Elden Ring Shadow of the Erdtree, check out IGN's ranking of every From Software Soulsborne DLC. And for everything else, keep it here on IGN.
Alright, so now we know what the normies have been watching. I don't even know how many people watch this. 204,000. That's kind of less than I would have expected. Anyway, now we have seen that. So, obviously, I don't necessarily think that the final shot of Mikola is at the end of the DLC, but, I mean, I could be wrong about that. Yeah, like, a lot of this stuff was like, hey, guys, did you see this thing? It was in the trailer. I don't really think, like, a lot of these were hidden. I thought, like, the right card connections were pretty okay. I didn't mention that myself, because like, I know, like, a lot of people have covered it, and we don't really know. I did briefly mention that some of like the spiral style pillars in the Shadow Realm can be seen in what are they called? In Volcano Manor. No, stop. Get down. Dog attack. Hold on one moment. And this is why I tend to not parry. It's because I'm trash. I done goofed. I felt like I should have blocked that. Anyway, I should probably rely more on dodging, and then I was just slow. Uh-oh. Uh-oh. Okay, there's a spot to stand. Okay, that's kind of nice. I should have dodged. I felt like I was way early for that. Alright, yeah, I screwed up. Why or... Alright, sorry about that. Okay. Hey, V-Limit, nice to see you again. And without horns, welcome back to the stream. Yeah, got real life invaded. He was starting to, like, boof my neck. I made the mistake of touching him while he was pawing at me. Their PlayStation controllers backwards? No, that's so they don't get sued. So it's not a PlayStation controller. Okay. So let's go ahead and dive on into some of those videos covering the interviews, because we haven't really gone into too much depth about them yet. Although IGN touched on them briefly. So I know like Ratatosker made these like pretty much like the day
this is Ratatosker.
That they came out. 21st, and then the next one was the 22nd. So, all right. Here we go.
Hey all, this is Erdtree, and today we need to talk about Shadow of the Erdtree, the Elden Ring expansion. Its trailer dropped today and confirmed the release date for June 21st, 2024. There are also 2 interviews that I found by Miyazaki elaborating on the DLC. So today we're going to go over them and talk about what they mean. First though, we should look at some of the auxiliary information. First of all, many people, myself included, had been speculating that this DLC would be huge, incredibly massive. And the basis of that speculation was just because that was a core point of Elden Ring, to continually surprise the players by its size. And in the announcement they called it an expansion, they didn't use the word DLC. An expansion evokes feelings of something much larger than a typical $15 DLC.
I think that's a good point as well. And also, like, the DLC ended up being like $40, which is pretty substantial for a DLC. But I mean, at this point, you're just like telling FromSoft, shut up and take my money, you know, if you're like that invested into Elden Ring. And I feel like all of their other DLCs have always like have always been worth the amount of money that I spent on them. So it was pretty much a no-brainer for me. Actually, I don't remember how much like the previous DLCs cost, but maybe they're like 20 or 30. But anyway, what else was I gonna say? I forget.
Well, now there seems to be a lot more evidence supporting that idea that the DLC would be absolutely huge. To begin with, on Steam it...
Alright, now I remember. So yeah, I was kind of hoping that the DLC would add in more areas, and it could also potentially revamp or revitalize the existing areas in the Lands Between. Not necessarily exactly like the Scholar of the First Sin, but maybe something more like where you like opt into them, like some of those cut features, like the Cataclysm feature, where like going to Divine Towers would make meteors fall down in the Lands Between. Just something to spruce up the basic overworld.
Lists 60 gigabytes of available space as a requirement, which shockingly is the same amount as Elden Ring itself. The expansion is also priced at $40, which I think we can use as an indication of its size and its...
I wonder if that spec is just the base form of Elden Ring, and it's not really including like new content, which I don't know. Would that like be false advertising? Not like literally, but just like, could that just be like a placeholder thing because they know like the base game is 60 gigs? I don't know. I need to like double check. But yeah, the storage info thing, if true, that is kind of a fascinating point that I haven't looked into. Levovit says, it seems like bad evidence. They likely just copy-pasted info from the base game. Okay. So I'm not the only one to potentially think that. Okay.
Its quality. This is going to be a very big DLC. Alright, let's move on and look at the interview by Miyazaki. The first question he's asked is, can you set the stage for us with Shadow of the Erdtree? Where is it taking place? And can you speak kind of generally regarding what the story is going to be about?
I'm assuming this is the IGN interview, but I don't believe Ratatosker said. Okay.
Miyazaki responds, "First of all, the setting of Shadow of the Erdtree is a brand new land. It's a brand new map separate from the lands between. It is a land that is overshadowed by the particular Shadow of the Erdtree as opposed to the Erdtree in the lands between. And it takes place, again, on an entirely separate, physically separate map, so it will involve a warp of sorts to get there. In terms of setting and themes, it technically occupies the same space as the lands between, the same universe, but due to something story-related that we won't reveal today, this has become physically disconnected, and you'll travel to the Shadow of the Erdtree land as a separate place. So this land of Shadow itself is a place where the player will visit to walk in the steps of Miquella. Miquella is a key part of the story this time, perhaps as guessed by many players who saw the art that was released previously. That is in fact Miquella, and it is he who traveled to the Land of Shadow and its players who will be tracing his path and following in his footsteps, trying to see what he's going to do there. Another axis of the story is Queen Marika and what she did in the Land of Shadow, and what led Miquella to follow her there. Alright, so, this is an alternate, overlapping dimension. And what we see there is not the Erdtree, but its shadow. It's not time travel, it seems to be a literal shadow land that became physically displaced as a result of some story-related phenomenon we don't yet know about. Miyazaki is then asked, "Speaking of this new land that we're traveling to, how is it structured? Is it structured in very much the same way as the lands between? Where are the legacy dungeons and minor dungeons? Can you describe a little bit about how the world is going to be compared to the base game?" Miyazaki responds, "Yes, we think players can expect a similar experience to what they had in the base game. This is going to be structured in a similar way, as you said, with open field maps, with large-scale legacy dungeons, and with small to medium-scale legacies as well."
I wonder if, like, this interview was done before the trailer was released, or if the interviewers had asked these questions having not seen the trailers, because I feel like the trailer does inform a little bit on that, but yeah, I'm just kind of curious.
So we hope players will enjoy this same sense of scale and sense of adventure throughout that structure. He's then asked, "Can you approximate the size of the world compared to the world in the base game?" Miyazaki responds, "It's hard to answer without giving away too much and to a high degree of accuracy, but if you think in terms of scale or size, it's probably comparable, if not larger, than the area of Limgrave from the base game." So I want to point out two things here.
Yeah, so Limgrave kind of sounds small at first, but there's actually like a really lot of content within Limgrave if you include the Shifra River underneath it, because that's technically part of the Limgrave area, I think. I'm not sure if that would include like the Weeping Peninsula. Like in my mind, Weeping Peninsula is part of Limgrave, maybe just because like the Godric style soldiers controlling the area, which yeah, I don't know, just like looking at the map of the Land of Shadow, from what we've seen so far, it seems like there's going to be a lot more content. So even if the overall size is similar to Limgrave, it seems like you've got multiple legacy dungeons compacted there, so maybe, you know, comparable to Stormvale, Weeping Peninsula, Castlemorn, and all that stuff. But yeah, it just seems like a very densely packed area. Whoa. And then you could also like make a lot of the exploration padded out through like the different elevations, and like needing to go through like one area to progress higher to like cross a bridge to get somewhere else. So they could definitely make a smaller area feel bigger. But man, I'm gonna have to like just do that. Oh no, now it's really buffering.
Talking about Limgrave here, I assume he means all of Limgrave, because Limgrave is actually larger than it seems. You have West Limgrave, which is the area that you start in, and then you have East Limgrave, which includes the forest with the rune bears. And then you also have the south area, which is also a part of Limgrave, and that area includes Morn Castle. So it's a pretty sizable area. I also want to draw attention to the fact that he said that there would be multiple large legacy dungeons, and also small to medium scale legacy dungeons as well. For those that don't know, legacy dungeons referred to the dungeons in Elden Ring that are similar in design to FromSoft's previous dungeons in Dark Souls. Things like Stormveil Castle, Raya Lucaria, Leyendell, and Farum Azula. So he mentioned multiple large legacy dungeons, which I'm assuming mean things like that, and several small to medium scale legacies as well, probably something similar to Morn's Castle and things like it. But
I would assume more along the scale of like the catacombs or maybe the heroes' graves, but yeah.
in a different interview with Eurogamer,
Kingsfield
Miyazaki
music is so
had
broken.
this to say.
Hey, Peace
This time
Frog.
we wanted
Alec,
to go
welcome
more
on
in
into
depth
the
and
stream.
bring a denser and richer level design, which brings these types of layouts together a little more seamlessly. There of course will be large open areas, there of course will be legacy dungeons, but we've also been experimenting with something a little more in between to bring a more diverse gameplay experience. So he mentions multiple legacy dungeons, both large and small, and he mentions the size that these places will be put in, something along the size of Limgrave. And if there's going to be multiples of them in Limgrave, that's going to be fairly densely packed. Limgrave only had Stormveil Castle, and the much smaller Morn Castle in the south. And it seems that they're also weaving in the existing environment into the legacy dungeons, allowing the transition from overworld to dungeon to happen more seamlessly.
To be fair, I think when you just think about the big places, that does make Limgrave sound smaller, but if you include all of the miscellaneous caves and catacombs, there's quite a few other features. Like, you've got the cave like way up north of where you would like find the Patches, like river and whatnot. You have the Patches cave, you've got the Uchigatana cave, you've got like 2 or 3 catacombs on the main body of Limgrave itself, plus the Impaler catacombs, the what are they called? The not Wandering Mausoleum, but close enough. Like, yeah, there's quite a decent amount of like small sections in Limgrave and Weeping Peninsula. Hey, Aaron Vice, nice to see you again. Thanks for the 5. Want there to be one mimic chest that'll be funny? I'll try to remember to mentally add your 5 to I think the 60 that you gave before. So keep our running tally going. I hope you're doing well. Euro grave indeed. Why does this just get crushed in the whole buffering? This is so annoying to me.
Overworld to dungeon to happen more seamlessly. Miyazaki is then asked about Mikola and the cocoon in Moog's boss room. Miyazaki responds, yes, the cocoon and arm you saw at the beginning of the trailer, that is actually the point of entry to the Land of Shadow, where the players will enter the DLC area. And this does have some relation to Mikola, and Mikola has, as we have said, traveled to the Land of Shadow. He does have some motive and some objective there, which we don't want to give away too much. But essentially the player will be following in those footsteps in the same way they followed the blessings of the Grace, the sites of grace in the lands between. And these will guide them through the Land of Shadow and reveal the motivation to them. And of course,
yeah, and I believe, hold on, maybe he says
the
it.
player is not the only one who is curious about.
Okay, so yeah, I'm pretty certain, at least in the Famitsu interview, that Miyazaki confirmed that they're like sites of grace specifically, or at the very least, like you'll still be able to warp throughout the Shadowlands. And I'm just curious, like, if the Shadowlands does have like a site of grace specifically, what that means for the lore, or if it's just kind of like gameplay mechanics. But yeah, it's kind of neither here nor there, I suppose.
Mikola, there are several characters in the world and NPCs who have been following Mikola as well, and the player will encounter them on their journey in the Land of Shadow, and they will make new friends and enemies, we hope. Miyazaki is then asked about the bosses that were shown in the trailer, specifically the giant basket of flame. Miyazaki responds, okay, so this giant basket of flame, as you eloquently put it, was a terrible weapon you used in a war that occurred in the Land of Shadow, basically. So
I like to pretend that Mitchell is the name of the Wicker Man rather than the interviewer.
So again, without saying too much, we can't give away the name just yet, but yes, it was a really gruesome weapon that was used. And the kindling that you see is actually the remains of bodies that were put in there to burn. Miyazaki is then asked about the worm that eats people, and he says, it's hard to talk about some of these enemies without spoiling anything. Hopefully you understand, but there's a significant connection between these enemies and the way they are in the Land of Shadow. Finally, Miyazaki is asked about the boss that seems to be the focal point for the DLC. Miyazaki responds, yes, we can speak to this character a little bit. This is, as you say, a key figure of this DLC. We believe he will be officially revealed to be Mesmer by the time the trailer goes live. He is a key figure in the DLC, and again has this important element of shadow to him, which is a key theme throughout the DLC as well. As you may have seen at the end of the trailer, there was this piece of key art where it shows Mesmer sat in his throne-like chair, and people who...
If I remember correctly, like, on the day of the trailer's release, the IGN interview had Mesmer spelled with one S, or maybe there's like some other like official promotional material where Mesmer only had one S in its name. So Mesmer's name is kind of interesting. Like, a lot of people have tried to do like some etymological like background research into it. I'm not sure if there's anything that's been like really conclusive. I liked the idea of Mesmer with one S because it's kind of like mesmerize, which might tie into the whole like bewitching branch aspect of Mikola striving clean the hearts of men. Or if you think of like a snake charmer, like mesmerizing snakes, I think there's like a lot of cool stuff that could go into that as well. But anyway. The shadow of gold umbra is red. Okay. They stole Mesmer from Steel Rising game?
who've played the game may recognize this throne.
V-Limit said actual Mandela effect going on there. You, for some reason, remembered it as 1S as well. No, I specifically saw it in something. Like, I know for a fact, and this isn't like a Mandela thing. Just because of, I knew there was a little bit of inconsistency. I would need to, like, double check. This could have just been, like, one of the Japanese materials. It might have had, like, a romanized name somewhere. Like, not everything is, like, always, like, set in stone, like, which is, like, in the, I think it's the Edge interview. They call Destined Death, like, Fated Death or something like that. So sometimes like stuff like that happens, especially because like the same translators aren't working on PR stuff as they are like game stuff. Like those get like forwarded to completely different companies and whatnot. But yeah, I definitely want to like look into that now that we have like a Mandela effect going on.
Room where you battle Morgoth. And this represents the thrones at the base of the Erdtree. And it's supposed to symbolize that Mesmer stands on equal footing to those other demigods and children of Marika who sat around in these thrones and held the rooms of the Erdtree. So he is an important figure who rivals these other demigods, and as you play the DLC you will learn a little about why he wasn't featured in the Legends of the Erdtree, the Lands Between. You'll realize why he exists in this shadow, this land of shadow. Now in the
Ooh-wee, sounds exciting. Mia Jepson, welcome into the stream. You thought the word mesmer was related to hypnosis? Yes, like I said, mesmerize. That's kind of, I guess I should type it in the chat. Maybe if I turn off caps lock. It's kind of associated with that. There's probably like some more history to the word that I just don't know to like expand upon further. But that's just kind of what I think of when I first see it. A Sarcastic said, Anton Mesmer. Oh, that, yeah, okay, yeah. That rings a bell. He invented hypnosis, and that's where you get the term mesmerize from. Okay, yeah. Thank you very much for that info there.
The other interview, the Eurogamer interview, it mentions that there will be over 10 new boss fights, plus plenty of new weapons, equipment, and skills to find. And 8 new weapon categories have been added to account for the new weapon types. Which is really, that's actually a big deal. If by weapon category they mean things like straight swords, great swords, ultra great swords, spear.
Yeah, it was just kind of so wild how that information was just there into the interview, and like how few people actually like really noticed and pointed it out when looking at the trailers. Like I honestly didn't even notice like the backhanded swords until like way later, just because they like kind of blended in so well. Actually, I'm gonna look for it. Because I meant to point it out and I forgot, like, multiple times. Where is... Okay, it's right here. Yeah, when he's fighting the Candle Ladies, he's actually backhanded wielding his, like, curved swords. But because they look so much like curved swords, it just kind of like looked natural to me, and I didn't even notice because it was like way too hyper focused on like the coolness going on with these enemies here. yeah, that just looks a lot better than I would have expected. And then you got like a pseudo bloodhound step going on. So yeah, at first when I heard about like the backhanded wielded weapons, I was like, okay, Kadaj. Like I didn't really care too much, but that actually looks pretty cool. I might want to like mess around with that when the DLC comes out a bit, but we'll see. Mesmer equals Mikola confirmed. Animal magnetism, yes.
Then that means they've added 8 distinct types of weapons. Not 8 weapons, 8 distinct types of weapons, and multiple weapons will fall into each one of those 8 categories, which is extremely impressive. Now, sticking to the Eurogamer interview for a moment, I want to elaborate on something that caught my interest. It says, ideas for the DLC began to form around the end of Elden Ring's development, as there were remaining ideas that were clearly not going to fit in, and would make more sense as a DLC. Development then began around the time updates and patches for the base game had begun to settle down. One of my biggest hopes for the DLC was that the DLC consisted of things that existed even in the base game's development. I've had a suspicion for a long time that the lore of Elden Ring is significantly harder to interpret than the lore of Dark Souls. Like there were elements missing that would help make sense of everything. And now we've gotten confirmations that that could be the case. The things in the DLC were things that were meant to be in the base game, but that there was too much of it and wouldn't fit in the game proper. And it made more sense to release it as a DLC at a later date.
And I think that makes a lot more sense within the context of Elden Ring kind of shipping in a semi-broken state. Patches' quest didn't complete. Nefeli Lu's quest was unfinishable. There was no Jarbairn. All of this stuff. And I'm not even talking about like 1.0. I'm talking about like day 1 patch. Like those were still broken. So Dialysis quest, well, I guess that's still Jarbairn's quest, but yeah. It came out in a bit of a rough shape despite everyone's like heaping praise for it. I think it's really easy to forget the performance issues the game had, which I tend to forgive that stuff because like sometimes it just needs a little bit of hammering out. But I am still a little bit bitter at just kind of how poorly the quests panned out in the base game and whatnot. Obviously they like added more to it and it's easier to forgive now, but I almost feel like jaded playing games when they first release because it just seems like the winning play is to just wait until they get patched into their actual final state. But anyway, maybe that's deserving of its own video someday. Blythe is broken. Bella says, what about a dual-wielded sword and or a hammer twice the size of your character model? We've kind of almost got that with some of like the super great swords, but not quite to that degree yet, yeah.
And the incredible size of this DLC might imply that a lot was left out. And I'm hoping that means that I'm not stupid for not fully understanding the themes of the game.
So yeah, I was talking with some members on the Discord about this a little bit last night as well, where I feel like Elden Ring in some ways is less approachable than Dark Souls in terms of like its completeness, but I also think it's a little bit unfair to compare the series just because Dark Souls has already had its trilogy, and all 3 of the Dark Souls games have had their DLCs, whereas Elden Ring just, relatively speaking, came out and doesn't have like a DLC to expand on the base stuff quite yet. And maybe we'll just end up being more frustrated by the DLC lore at the end of it after all. So we'll just have to hold our breath.
That might be copium, but that's my hope. Plus, From Software has a history of better elaborating the main game's themes with the DLC, making it more clear what exactly was going on in the base game with the narrative of the DLC. And that's a trend I hope they continue. Anyway, back to the original interview. Miyazaki is asked about what role George R.R. Martin played in the development of the DLC's story. Miyazaki responds, "The way George Martin's story has been incorporated is the same as it was in the base game with Elden Ring. And to avoid misunderstanding here, we just want to point out that he hasn't written anything exclusively and new for the sake of this DLC. But it would still be fair to say that he and his mythos that he created for us are involved in the creation of Shadow of the Erdtree in the same way. And the reason for that is that in making the base game and making Elden Ring, we took from that mythos, but we only took one part of it. We took from the part that created the story of Elden Ring and created the world that we wanted to envision, and Shadow of the Erdtree is yet another part of the original mythos that he wrote, and that has inspired us to create the story of this DLC. So basically, George R.R. Martin has nothing to do with this DLC, apart from what he did initially when he helped write the mythos of Elden Ring. And
I'm really curious, like, what George's notes or like contributions to the game are in relation to things like the birth of the Erdtree specifically, and things pertaining to like the Omen, the Misbegotten, or like the Crucible, and dragons, because like a lot of stuff within Elden Ring is very reminiscent of like Dark Souls, like ancient dragons, like that. You know, it's kind of like a classic FromSoft trope at this point. So it's kind of weird to try to draw the lines of like where Miyazaki's and like the FromSoft team's like mythos ends and George R.R. Martin's begins. Because especially when you look at some of the comparisons between the text of like the 1.0 version of the game versus the retail build of the game, there are quite a lot of differences that I don't think would be well accounted for with like the George R.R. Martin approach being like the main focus for the lore of the game, just because like Morgott was called Elden Lord in his robes, which is just absolutely wild to me that he could have been like considered an Elden Lord at some point in development. But maybe it was just shorthand. I don't know like how it all got fleshed out. But anyway, yeah, let's go ahead and go back into the video.
Probably take a moment to clarify on this subject, because some people will still believe that George R.R. Martin wrote the story of Elden Ring, and that's not the case. What he did is he wrote the backstory for the characters. He wrote a mythos for the world that existed before the events of Elden Ring. He gave that information to From Software, and Miyazaki read that, and from that drew inspiration for the story of Elden Ring. In interviews, Miyazaki has said that Martin would be surprised to see how the characters turned out. Martin wouldn't know that Godric looks grafted the way he is, or Rykard is a big serpent now. Martin wrote the initial, more heroic elements of the characters, but the events of the game's history that led them to become deformed, distorted, and corrupted, that's entirely on Miyazaki. It's really not Martin's story at all. He just wrote the backstory from which From Software draws inspiration.
And so if like Mesmer was in the Land of Shadow and that was kind of secluded from like the whole Shattering War, that makes me wonder whether or not Mesmer was like tainted by like the rune shards or anything like that, and whether or not it was isolated from the events of the Shattering, and if so, like does that actually make it closer to George R.R. Martin's kind of like original mythos or vision for this kind of like story, or is it still like the old FromSoft special there? Mesmer lost the annals of history. Gotta get rid of him. He lost those damn books. Didn't you see America try to put them together in her bedroom? No wonder why he got banished.
Next, the interviewer asks Miyazaki about the question of difficulty. And Miyazaki says the following. Our general approach to difficulty has of course not changed to Elden Ring. We want to create a challenging experience that tests the players and gives them a feeling of satisfaction and accomplishment when they get through these struggles. However, we do want to stress that there's still a freedom of approach and a breadth of strategy to these encounters, and that means both how you approach them, if you want to face these challenges, or come back to them later and circumvent them and find another way around and come back when you're ready. This same philosophy is taken in Shadow of the Erdtree, and to our more hardcore players, they will find optional bosses who have been tuned in a similar way to the likes of Malenia, who I'm sure you remember from the base game, who are not crucial. They're not crucial to completion of the DLC, but they are an optional extra to challenge those who are so inclined. That said, there may not be another boss on exactly the same level as Malenia, but we feel this is somewhere that we've paid close attention to, this level of challenge and offering that same level of freedom. And we hope that players are able to blossom in the Land of Shadow in the same way that they were in the lands between. Actually, I want to redress that. It's not the fact that it's only a lesser level to Malenia, but we have prepared bosses on that with a similar mindset within the DLC area, ones that will challenge the player and hopefully be as memorable as Malenia was.
All right, so this might be a little bit controversial, but I was kind of disappointed at how Millennia ended up in the game, just because like she seemed super hyped up with like the whole Valkyrie statue and like really prominent role in the Elden Ring trailers and whatnot, but there's just very little character to go along with it. So I kind of almost wish like I got like a Millicent statue instead of Millennia. Actually, like playing through the game my very first time, I was like 90% confident that Millicent was Millennia, who had just kind of like lost her memories after like the fight with Radahn. And that would have seemed like super cool, like if you made Millicent become Millennia, like reverted her to her true form to like fight her. Oh man, that would have been so cool to me that I'm still kind of disappointed at how that like fully ended up. But maybe the DLC will expand on it a bit more. Huffing that copium right there, man. Santeria's PTSD is kicking in. NV Limit says Millennia, of course, has those cut voice lines about having met you before, which is so sad it's not in the final game. Yeah. Which is like, well, on one hand, I am like disappointed at how long it takes for like the DLC to come out. Like with as much content was in Elden Ring and like how much they like polished it after the game was technically already completed, it just kind of makes me really wish that FromSoft ever had like the actual time and money to like make the final form of the game that they wanted to make. But you know, gotta go to the land of dreams for that. Scowleasy said, you really hope From hasn't started confusing difficult with fun? I mean, there's always Dark Souls 2, am I right? Millennia is pretty simple and straightforward, which makes her more accessible. Maybe, I don't know. Like, difficult fights can be fun, but I feel like Elden Ring was a little bit all over the place with its balance of said difficulty, because on one hand, you could always mitigate a lot of the difficulty with a spirit summon, but on the other hand, like some bosses almost felt like required just to get the requisite amount of like space and time to heal when dealing with some of the bosses. Like I feel like Morgoth and Malekith can be a bit oppressive. Malekith as Geraint more specifically. Like actual Malekith isn't that difficult to me, but just like Geraint is kind of rough with how quickly he can close the gap and whatnot. But like Moog, I think, is an absolute S tier boss fight to do mano a mano. Maybe not quite S tier. Like there's like one or two moves that I wish were like tweaked slightly, but anyway, yeah.
So here he's saying that the bosses are going to be super hard, and there will be optional bosses comparable to Millennia. Jumping back to the Eurogamer interview, Miyazaki is asked if the DLC has a poison swamp, and this is his reply. In a word, yes, but this was actually a point of introspection for me after creating the base game. It was only after creating it that I realized I really like to create poison swamps. And this was a little place of introspection and reflection for me, so maybe...
This is kind of one of my favorite interview questions ever, just because like it's been such a meme, at least in the Western community, that like Miyazaki loves poison swamps, and he himself didn't realize it until like working on the DLC of Elden Ring. It's kind of ironic. Hey Napa, welcome on in. The fire that hangs on the tombstones for Moog is a bit annoying. Yeah, I would tweak his like the ones where he like throws the blood flame ever so slightly, and maybe the one explosion that he does like right in front of his face, I would give a little bit less of a hitbox like next to his body, so you could like roll past it a bit more consistently, because that one just feels a little bit rough. But other than like one or two things for him, like I think he's one of the most fair like boss fights in Elden Ring. Zunk Scoob.
Maybe when players reach the poison swamp in the DLC, they will feel a little bit of this introspection. Notably, there's a part in the trailer that seems to show what looks like a death blight swamp. And if that's what that is, then Miyazaki's reflections have led him into some interesting places. I remember the interview where he was asked why there were poison swamps in all his games, and he was like, oh, I guess I do put poison swamps in my games. So this situation is that interviewer's fault. Miyazaki is then asked if there would be another DLC, or if there's a Elden Ring 2 in the works. Miyazaki responds, We don't want to say this is the end of Elden Ring's saga for now. I think we said a similar thing at the end of Dark Souls 3. We didn't want to flatten those possibilities or put a pin in them just at that time. And it's a similar story with Elden Ring. We don't want to discourage the possibilities for that. There might be more ideas in the future. We don't have any current plans to make second DLC or a sequel, but we definitely don't want to snuff out that possibility. We think there could well be something in the future. So this is interesting. He says we don't have any plans with it right now, but maybe in the future. And he says that they said something similar with Dark Souls 3. But that actually is not good news, because there's almost certainly not going to be a Dark Souls 4 that's directed by Miyazaki. If Dark Souls 4 comes out, he's not going to do it. He's made it very clear. The entire point of Dark...
To be fair, I think it might be a little bit wrong for fans to assume like how much of an influence Miyazaki does still have on the games directly, especially since he moved into the position of president, which, I mean, I'm pretty sure he still like has some modicum of control. But I mean, if you actually like look at the credits of Elden Ring and stuff, and you like look at the things which I think like most people would enjoy, like level designers, enemy designers, all that stuff, like it's a team effort to make a video game, and obviously like directors help shape that vision, and they have to make the final calls of like when you have to like stop production to focus on like certain things, like ship the game. That's actually like a really, really difficult job. But I feel like when you compare the state of Elden Ring to like the state of Armored Core and whatnot, I think FromSoft as a whole is a pretty competent company, and I don't really think that the magical formula is Miyazaki himself, if that makes sense. And Oswald River, welcome on into the stream. You just came from a Ratatosker podcast and saw I was live. That's awesome. I didn't realize he was podcasting now, or at least like literally like this moment. Without Horns feels the same about Garank and Malekith. Nice. Yeah, it's a well-oiled machine at FromSoft. Maybe. Yeah, and I think like one of the difficulties of I don't even like know how to call like FromSoft. Are they like a AA developer? Are they AAA now? Like their games are definitely better than AAA quality most of the time at this point, but they're still a relatively, I guess you can't really call them small, but like compact type company where like their team isn't ridiculously top heavy. Like they still have like trouble like recruiting and like filling gaps, and they're like, you know, working with what they have. And so I do think like the corporate culture is probably important, and like making a kind of like consistent vision is probably one of like the more difficult aspects of being a company of that size, like moving forward and like growing and whatnot. Premier third party, nice. Okay.
Dark Souls 3 is that Miyazaki doesn't want to make any more Dark Souls games. That's the point. And if his feelings on Elden Ring are comparable, then he's probably moved on to something else. He's making other games, and he doesn't want to work on Elden Ring right now anymore. Now the interviewer asks the final question. He asks, the state of the game industry right now is pretty rough. There are a lot of layoffs, studio closures, and the PS5 apparently is already in the later stage of its life cycle. Has the landscape of the industry changed your outlook at all on From Software's future?
And that's kind of like one of the wildest things to me about Elden Ring, is that like a lot of people crapped on its graphical fidelity, but I'm like, you got to remember it came out for like the PS4 and whatever the Xbox console was called. I can't remember. And so like this isn't even technically like the quote unquote next gen FromSoft game. So yeah, it's kind of wild. Like they have like a lot of growth left in the company that they can do. So yeah, I don't know what else to say about that. So yeah, I think a lot of people took like the PS5 being in the latter half of its life cycle comment as like they blew that way out of proportion, which I mean, I think it's like objectively true. Like the PS5 has been out for like what, 4 or 5 years now. So do you really expect the console to last like 10, 11, 12 years? I mean, if it does, that's great. That's amazing. Get your money's worth. But I mean, I think it just kind of blindsided people just because like COVID really slowed down development. But I also don't think like people are really ready for, maybe not people, I don't think companies are ready for like higher graphical fidelity in terms of like hardware. Like we still like have a lot of issues trying to maintain a stable 60 frames per second with 4K, even on like this most souped up PC graphics cards that we have right now. So yeah, I don't expect a console to come for quite a couple years. And I know there's like a lot of rumors going around with like PS5 Pro, which might be nice, and like using AI to help upsample games, which seems like the most grounded way to kind of like reach those target goals. But I don't really think like another console is the way to go. Maybe there's going to be like hope with like the portable scene with like the Switch 2 or whatever its predecessor is going to be, or successor is going to be. But yeah, we'll see. This gen was a waste. History will ignore the 5. It doesn't matter anymore. I feel like it doesn't matter anymore. It might be more correct, because like there doesn't really feel like there's going to be like a lot of console exclusives. But I think it's just because like there wasn't enough of a generational advance between the PS4 and the PS5 to really truly warrant the PS5 generation. And it feels a little bit stagnant as far as like the hardware goes to like support the next gen push. Obviously, with that being said, I will like still commend like the PS5 and Xbox for making that final push to like SSDs, because that's going to be like the biggest contributor to like changes in gaming. But you know, PC's kind of already been there, but at least that like makes it the norm to have like fast load times. Zero thrust for this gen. I don't necessarily know about that, but I do think COVID definitely took a lot of wind out of the sails. Couldn't get one for 3 years and nothing came out for 5. Well, a lot of that is like due to the scalpers and stuff. But yeah, there do need to be like better first-party games, or even third-party games right now. Yeah, as Andrew Bowen says, or Bowen. Compared to the 2 and 3, there's been nothing. Yeah, like for sure.
Miyazaki responds, yes, I'm aware of the situation in the games industry. What it's going through right now is quite harrowing. I think in terms of speaking to all those things that are happening, like layoffs and closures at other studios, it's difficult for me to understand the exact circumstances there. I won't speak to those specifics. Just speaking on behalf of From Software, I think we are very blessed in that we have a lot of keen, up-and-coming developers who've grown and they've developed within the studio, and they've reached these director positions where they're able to direct projects such as the recent Armored Core 6. We have several of these up-and-coming directors who were able to delegate these projects to, and were able to have multiple projects on the go at once. What I foresee in this climate, at least for us, is a From Software where games can be directed by others, not only myself. I think in the face of that struggle and the place where the games industry is right now, I do see this as a time for us to continue to grow and to continue to cultivate this talent and continue to release these games for as long as we can.
And so yeah, that just kind of goes back to what I was saying about like Miyazaki himself isn't necessarily like the magic ingredient to like of success, and that like a lot of this stuff has been delegated to his various directors. So even though Armored Core obviously didn't sell nearly as well as Elden Ring, I also don't think that FromSoft had expectations that it would. Like Elden Ring was just kind of like lightning in a bottle for them. Like they knew they were making a good game, but it just kind of vastly exceeded their expectations, which I'm really glad to hear about, because like they definitely deserve a lot of the accolades that they've received. Obviously, I do think they could improve in many ways, don't get me wrong, but yeah, it's just nice that they're finally getting some of the recognition I think they deserve.
And it's interesting that he uses the word several to describe the up-and-coming directors that are able to direct projects. They have several of these projects. Several means at least 3. So if we take his words at face value, there are at least 3 games that are being directed by other people at From Software.
And I don't know if this is just like a Japanese to English thing. I would kind of want to like double check the original to see if it necessarily has that implication specifically. But even if so, that still wouldn't strike me as being like too wild, because you would have the Armored Core, game being worked on, Elden Ring and or its DLC like having the simultaneous development. So they've kind of historically always had like 2.5 games like being worked on at a time, it seems. And if they are scaling up, it just kind of makes sense that they could be scaling to 3 and or 4. So time will tell.
And I remember in a previous interview, Miyazaki said that he intends to continue directing, and I got the sense from the wording in that interview that he's probably working on at least 1 or 2 things himself, which means potentially they're secretly working on 5 projects. I am extremely excited for Shadow of the Erdtree, but just as much, I'm excited to hear what else From Software has in the works. The release of this DLC isn't only going to be a great DLC to an already great game, it also signifies that From Software will begin telling us what else they have cooking. Anyway, that's the end of this video. As always, thank you very much for watching. Hey all, this is Erdtree.
So that was a good video by
Erdtree.
Hidetaka. I'm going to go ahead and like it because, you know, it's good. I kind of regret not thinking about like covering the DLCs. I should have linked the IGN one. I kind of regret not thinking about like talking about the DLCs and its interviews because, you know, that's something I could comment on pretty directly with like the whole Famitsu thing and whatnot. But yeah, it's just nice, good content creation right there that I should have thought of as well. Anyway, let's go ahead into the next one where Hidetaka covers the Shadow of the Erdtree Sekiro mechanics. And this will probably be the last video for the night.
Hey all, this is Hidetaka.
What about that new Spellbound game? I don't believe anything until after it's out. I'm not even sure we're getting a Shadow of the Erdtree DLC in less than 2 months now.
Hey all, this is Hidetaka. Yesterday in a video I went over a interview that Miyazaki had for Shadow of the Erdtree. And in that interview he said something interesting. He said that Shadow of the Erdtree would have level up elements that would level up your attack power in a way similar to Sekiro. And at the time I didn't really understand it. The interview was in Japanese and I used Google Translate to try and make sense of it. But the translation was awkward and made me think maybe there was something I was missing.
And I did watch this video because I don't remember why I watched this one specifically, but maybe Hidetaka like asked the question, and I know like after he made this video, like I like looked at the Famitsu thing as, oh yeah, no, what you said in your video was more or less correct. So yeah, sometimes Google Translate can pull through if you can kind of like read between the lines a bit.
Even though I asked several different people that speak Japanese, and they told me the Google Translate version was more or less accurate. Let me read to you what the question was and what Miyazaki's answer was. Are there any new elements unique to the DLC? Miyazaki responds,
oh yeah, and before I forget, somebody on Reddit did have a full translation of the Famitsu interview. If anybody has not seen it, I'm going to go ahead and link it in the chat. So there you go there. And let's go back to the video.
level up elements limited to the DLC have been added. It's easy to understand if you imagine something like Offensive Power in Sekiro Shadows Die Twice. But apart from the conventional levels, there is Offensive Power that is only effective in the DLC field. This was prepared for the freedom to challenge threats that I mentioned earlier, and it allows you to say things like, this boss is tough, so let's explore another area and try again after becoming stronger. This makes it easier to experience even at high levels. On the other hand, by suppressing the increase in offensive power, players will be able to experience the challenge of challenging threats at lower level. End quote. So as you can see, the translation is a bit awkward, but I think I understand what it's trying to say now. I believe that they're adding this level up system to try and combat a problem that all the From Software DLCs have had up until this point. And the problem that I'm referring to is that the DLCs will usually be at least as hard as the endgame stuff in the base game, and usually harder, both in level design and in bosses. Now that itself isn't the problem. I want and I expect the DLC to be at least as hard as the hardest stuff in the base game. But because it's tuned for endgame, people will have their builds done and ready by the time the DLC lands. So beforehand they'll get to the level that they're going to get, and they'll upgrade their weapons all the way, they'll get the spells that they want, they'll finish their build. Their build will be finished and ready for the DLC. And here's where the problem lies. There's no progression in the DLCs to From Software games.
And that's kind of also how I feel about the New Game Plus cycles. I kind of always wanted what I called a New Game Minus option, where you can just kind of like start a new game, except keeping like the equipment that you want to use or something like that, so that way you could like go through the game and upgrade your golden greatsword or golden order greatsword from like level 0 all the way up to, you know, the max level, just like playing through the game normally. And it's kind of lame having to have somebody like get summoned into your world and like drop the items that you want to use for you. But I mean, at least you can do that, which is kind of one of the workarounds to it. I know with the newest Lords of the Fallen patch, they might have something kind of like that with the whole like randomizer and stuff going on, which I think is really interesting, and I might like want to like look into that a bit more. But honestly, like I already platinumed Lords of the Fallen, and I just kind of don't feel the need to go back just yet. So nonetheless, I do hope what Lords of the Fallen has done will help show that there's a kind of market for that stuff in these types of games in the future. Hey, Zachary Holly, welcome on in. You ain't even analyzing it, you're analyzing someone else's stuff? Lazy? That is totally right, but there's nothing wrong with that. Remembering me smearing tarnished archaeologists and you think he's an idiot, but I'm an idiot too? That's cool, go get a job. I have one. So you can get banned. Yeah, let's do this. All right, there we go. So
the builds are done, the weapons are upgraded, the spells are gotten. You can still level up, but how much level ups impact your effectiveness plateaus the higher.
Right, and so one thing that I am really curious about with the way they're going to try to implement this offensive power system is whether or not they're going to also affect a character's base stats, because even if your offensive capability is kind of mitigated by the environments of the enemies that you're facing, that doesn't necessarily mean that you'll have like less stamina to work with, less FP, less HP, which I think is going to provide a lot more benefits than people might like necessarily expect with the whole like balancing of offensive power versus sustainability, I suppose. And so I am curious whether or not they're going to try to implement something equivalent to the fetid, rotted, cursed chalice dungeons of Bloodborne in terms of like nerfing the player's base stats as they go into the DLC. I think on one hand that could be very interesting, but it could also be very what's the word? Annoying? That's not the word that I wanted to use, but I can't think of the other one. So yeah, I think it could be an elegant solution to like make people feel a bit of progression by like starting off like nerfing and like capping their base stats, like letting them grow with like the whole like offensive power stuff. But it could also feel very hindering, I suppose. Good to see community cleanup in action. I mean, it happens. It's actually like I think the first time it's happened like directly on stream, but it's whatever. Like if people want to call the content lazy, sure, but I mean I enjoy it. If you guys are here, I hope you enjoy it nonetheless. And honestly, like doing this stuff has helped me like understand the community's thoughts better and like help me like tailor some videos that I thought could like plug in some gaps in like the community at large. Like I made a lot of my ending videos because I thought of like looking at everybody else's stuff just made me like want to like put my take out there. So yeah, I don't know. I think like there's a kernel of truth to it. Like I'll accept like calling it lazy because it's kind of true. But I mean like also like when you can consider like me doing a stream like off the cuff reacting to other people's content, sure, I would say that is kind of lazy, but I mean, it took me literally over 2 months to just produce like the last video, and it's just not like as like a content creator, like it's just like not like the juice isn't worth the squeeze to put that much amount of effort into it to not get like a lot of like viewers like right off the bat to like keep sustaining the channel and helping it grow. So like part of my like rationale for doing stuff like this is trying to make content in between the times where I'm like working on other stuff, which requires a lot more time and effort to do, unfortunately. So like I wish I was better at producing content like naturally, but I'm not. So oh well, we'll just deal with it. Death by Catacombs, that'd be kind of crazy. Sekiro Joan, welcome on in. And Shurtugal. How do you pronounce that? Yeah, you just picked up the game for the first time and made it all the way to Millennia. Nice. How have you been enjoying the game so far? Hopefully you liked it. I know Millennia can be a bit rough, especially depending on one's build. You found my content when looking at Bloodborne retranslations? Nice. Yeah, that's kind of like the one that put me on the map. Yeah, I'm glad that's been a resource that's been able to help others. And I'm also really glad that Aruki Mania has been contributing it to that project as well. So that way, like, people don't necessarily have to rely on my retranslation specifically. So they can look at the official localization, mine stuff, and Aruki Mania's, and or like Google Translate if they want to go that route. It's your first time you got her to half HP. Phase 1, so you're feeling like if you spend some time, you'll get her, you'll get better. Yeah, that's the spirit, man. When you get knocked down, gotta get back up again. Never gonna keep us down. Alright, let's go back to the video.
The level you are. When you're level 40, leveling up 30 more times is a much bigger deal than leveling up even 100 times when you're level 200. And so tackling the DLC, once you've fully upgraded your weapons and your build is basically done, greatly limits your ability to experience one of the core mechanics of Elden Ring. And that's the experience of facing a tough boss or a tough challenge and deciding, I'm going to go elsewhere, get stronger elsewhere, and come back to here. This is something that you'll experience a lot throughout the base game.
Meanwhile, me bashing my head against the grafted scion and resetting my game until I killed it, bashing my head against the tree sentinel until I killed it. Yeah, it is fun to like go different directions and explore, but I also like get very stubborn about needing to kill the thing that's right in front of me because it's like the current Mount Everest in front of me. So with that being said, I really do like to meander my way around, but if I meet something, like I always like want to kind of go through it, unless it's just too annoying to really seem feasible.
The first time that you're going through it, the first time that you're collecting weapons and upgrade materials and leveling up, you might find a wall you can't overcome or don't want to overcome at this moment and decide to go in a different direction, and going in that different direction actually will make you stronger and make that wall easier to overcome at a later date. One of the reasons Elden Ring is an open world is specifically so you have the ability to do just that. And you typically can't do that very well in the DLCs, because you're about as strong as you're going to be.
Oswald said, did I have that same stubborn feeling with Genichiro? You mean the very first iteration of Genichiro in Sekiro? I don't know. I didn't want to like try. Okay, so that's a good point to bring up. So I didn't do that with him because like I didn't understand Sekiro's combat, and yeah, I was just too green at that style of game to go back and like want to do it. However, on subsequent playthroughs, I've definitely done it. So there's like a fine line between like challenge versus tedium, and if something feels challenging to me, I'll want to do it, but if it feels like it would be too tedious, then I probably won't. Nemo spent 6 total hours fighting the first tree sentinel. I think I unironically had over 200 resets fighting the grafted scion at the very beginning of the game, because I had a really rough time getting used to Elden Ring's controls, and also trying to like learn things like the guard counter, and like figuring out like that is not actually that effective of a tool, and it was like more of a noob trap. I had a really rough time my first like 8 hours playing Elden Ring, I will admit.
Okay, so let's keep that in mind. Now we need to talk about how attack power works in Sekiro. In Sekiro, you don't have levels, really. and your attack power will stay the same until you beat a certain boss. There are certain bosses that will give you memories. Once you've killed the boss, you can consume the memory at a bonfire, and that will permanently increase your attack power. In Sekiro, there were a few directions that you can head in. So ideally, if you got stuck in a boss, you could head in another direction, beat a boss that gives you a memory in that direction, and that ought to make the boss that you were stuck on easier. And that's the mechanic that Miyazaki's referring to in that interview. Let's go look at the interview again. This time I'm going to show you a different translation that I got from a better website. People were telling me to use DeepL in the comments, and that's going to help make sense of what was being said.
Yeah, I would recommend using DeepL over Google Translate for pretty much. I don't think like Google Translate, in my experience, has ever been more effective. Although, to be honest, I really don't use Google Translate that often, except for when I'm being lazy and just trying to pawn something off like super quickly. But yeah, just use DeepL instead.
The new translation says,
you can't beat
system
the boss on the horse.
That is exclusive to the DLC. It is easy to understand if you are imagining it like the offensive power in Sekiro Shadows Die Twice. This is the threat that we have been talking about. This is for the freedom to take on threats, as I mentioned earlier, and it makes it easier to experience things like, this boss is tough, so let's explore another place, get stronger, and try again, even at higher levels. On the other hand, by restraining the player from raising his or her aggressiveness, it is possible to experience the challenge of taking on a threat at a low level. End quote. Okay, now let's parse this. Miyazaki wants you to have the freedom to take on threats, and he describes this as the ability to fight a strong boss, decide that that's not what you want to do right now, go to a different place, get stronger at that place, and then try again. And that he wants you to experience this even at high levels. The system in the DLC is trying to get high-level people to experience the feeling of progression that they felt when they first played the game. The next sentence says, on the other hand, by restraining the player from raising his or her aggressiveness, it is possible to experience the challenge of taking on a threat at a lower level. And again, this sentence needs to be parsed. I take it to mean that by not engaging in this system, by not upgrading your attack power in this way, your aggressiveness, it is possible to experience the challenge of taking on a threat at a lower level. And that's very interesting. I asked someone who speaks Japanese, and they said that the text gave them the feeling that enemies in the DLC will have resistances to your attack that they wouldn't have in the normal Lands Between. And thus it would be more effective to level up your power with this new system that is exclusive to the DLC. It sounds like they're kind of equalizing the damage that builds output.
Yeah, I'm really curious to see how that's going to work, especially with the whole element of being able to upgrade weapons for like the base level content and how that will transfer over into the DLC specifically. And like part of me is skeptical about this because if you need to already kill Radahn and Luminary Moog, like he's pretty much an endgame boss, and if you need to kill him to access the DLC, does like how much nerfing like really needs to be done to the players? Is this supposed to like make somebody who's like level 500 equivalent to somebody who's 120? Because I feel like 120 is probably about let's say like 110 to like 140 is probably where I think most people will end up killing Luminary Moog at, assuming that they go through like the long way and don't use like the Vare quest to skip ahead. How do you guys feel about that in the chat? Like, what do you guys kind of remember what level you fought Luminary Moog at? Because yeah, he's pretty much an end game boss in my mind. Moog is easy, can do level 1, no weapon. I mean, yeah, anybody can like beat the game at rune level 1, but that doesn't mean that like they're not at that level there. Sounds about right to you? Billiam said, when you did Ganesho, it took you 4 hours and the parry system didn't click until that fight. I unironically think Geni is the best Soulsborne boss they've designed, just because like he makes you competent at Sekiro. Like, unless you somehow cheese him, you will not beat him unless you're actually like competent at like the basics of combat in Sekiro. You were 110 the first time you died, but you got it. You died a lot, but you got it. Nice. 150 to 160, 140, 130. Okay. So like maybe like 110 to like 150 probably. Solar can't kill the man on the horse in Sekiro. You just gotta keep trying. Maybe, I guess, yeah. So Sekiro runs into the issue of like it makes you play the game the way that it wants to be played, and you don't really have a lot of options to over level content to get better. So you just kind of like have to figure it out, man. Can't really say it any other way. You love the lightning reversal of Genichiro. Mastering it was a blast. I feel like the way that they incorporated the lightning blast was a bit overkill, but it does, like, the fact that it like shows up again later, I think it just kind of like made it better in retrospect. Like my first time going through Geni and then getting to that section of the fight, I felt like, man, this is garbage. Why are they like adding this in now of all the times? And then like looking back, you're like, oh, okay, it did kind of have like a purpose, but it would have been nicer if there's like a little bit more of like a lead into it, I suppose. Oswald still thinks Sword Saint Ishin is the best FromSoft boss. Got to use everything you learned in the game. I do like Sword Saint Ishin, don't get me wrong, but I feel like I do unironically think he's a bit too hard, or like a bit more of like a war of attrition than like he needs to have been. And there's nothing necessarily wrong about that, but I think like the way that like the placement of Genichiro as like the midpoint boss and kind of like as an adversary just worked a lot better for me than Sword Saint. And also, don't sleep on normal Ishin. He's actually really tough as well. I was kind of surprised at like how much trouble normal Ishin gave me after like already beating the game and whatnot.
In order to accomplish two things. Number one, give high-level builds the ability to feel a sense of progression. It lets them have access to the feeling of getting stronger that they wouldn't be able to have otherwise because of their high level. And it lets high-level people not worry that their build will steamroll through everything in the DLC. I have seen so many posts of people talking about, am I too high level for the DLC? I'm level 500. What level should I be when I tackle the DLC? And this happens in every FromSoft game every time DLC is announced.
And I think it is kind of right to worry about that to a bit of a degree, more so in Elden Ring than the other games, because like it's one thing to have to go back to like Dark Souls 3, you know, you can just kind of run past most enemies, beat the bosses that you want to beat, and grab the equipment that you want to grab, but that's takes a hell of a lot more time depending on what you want to use in Elden Ring, you know, because like the overworld is so huge. So if you have a character that's level 500, you might not enjoy the DLC, and it is kind of a big ask to ask someone to go back and like go into the DLC with a character that's like level 130 or something like that, you know? So I don't know. So the fact that they're trying to like tune down the players, I think is a really smart idea, but I am a bit apprehensive about it because it sounds like it'd be easier to get it wrong or not fully right than it is to like get it perfect, but you know, they might do it. 250 for Moog. With that horn said, your big problem with Sekiro is learning that you can parry even the monkey's attacks. You always assume the huge attacks need to be dodged, even though the red danger attacks didn't show up. Okay. You always had a feeling that Elden Ring would have benefited with barriers between areas, i.e. more wandering bosses. Could you elaborate on that? Because I feel like what you might be saying might be different from what I'm interpreting. So are you saying like more roadblocks? So like the way that you would get up to Dectus, they have like a bunch of enemies there? Or the way that you kind of have like the Valiant Gargoyle outside of like the Bestial Sanctum, but just like more and in like better places? Or I guess like a good roadblock boss would be the twin, maybe I'm using good relatively here, not really, but the Valiant Gargoyle fight to get into Noxtella might be an example of that. Although I hate that fight. That might be like my least favorite fight in the entire game. The twin gargoyles.
By flattening the amount of damage that you do in this way, people won't need to worry so much about what level they are and whether they'll have a good experience. And because this attack power buff only functions in the DLC area, it won't affect the balance of the main game. I've always thought this inability to experience the feeling of progression was a real flaw in previous From Software DLCs. And I've previously proposed the idea of maybe giving DLC areas access to new upgrade materials and increasing the maximum upgrade level of weapons higher. In that way, people are incentivized to pick up items again like they did in the beginning, and they can also feel themselves getting stronger. But that was a bad idea because it has too many problems. First of all, people that don't have the DLC would still have no access to those upgrade materials. And you can't put them in the base game because the base game isn't balanced for you having access to those materials. Plus, people that buy the DLC would have a PvP advantage, since their weapons would do more damage. There was just too many problems with it. This is a much more elegant solution and fixes something I've been complaining about for years. You get to have a sense of progression, you get to re-experience the feeling of facing something that's too tough and deciding to go elsewhere for a time before you come back to it. And it wouldn't affect the enemy balance or PvP balance of the base game. I like it. Assuming it works the way I've described, it gives us the opportunity of going through the process of getting good all over again, even with...
I like it the way that I imagine it. It's just kind of funny when you think about it that way, but yeah. I do think there's a lot of potential in it. I hope it works out well, and part of the reason why I wanted to look at this video is just because I do think this is something that hasn't been discussed quite as much as I think it might deserve the discussion. Maybe we'll start to get more info about like the DLC and the upcoming like month and a half that we have left. But anyway, yeah, I'm just glad that Erdtree had like the vision to like make a video just like talking about this specifically, because well, I did think about it. I mean, I also looked at the Famitsu interview when it came out, so like I kind of knew it, but it's kind of easy for me to like take some information for granted just because like a lot of stuff just kind of like blends together when you're like absorbing it all at once. And there was like a lot of stuff to cover and a lot of hype to go through with the Shadow over the Erdtree announcement with the trailer and whatnot. So yeah, I'm glad he brought more attention to this specifically there.
Our high-level builds. Anyway, that's the end of this video. As always, thank you very much for watching.
Alright, so I have already liked this one, so if you guys want to give Erdtree a like and or a sub, if you have not subbed to him before, I would highly recommend it. And yeah, that was that video. So we only covered like 4 videos if you count the trailer. So a little bit less than I expected, to be honest, but I'm not too surprised because I figured there'd be a lot to talk about with the trailer itself. So tomorrow I do kind of want to look at Elden Enthusiast's video that he made. It took him a long time to work on. I might do that. I might look at another video or two about the Shadow of the Erdtree, maybe Zoli's. I'm not entirely sure about the order yet, so stay posted. We will be going live again regularly at 10 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, at least up until the DLC releases, I think. So I want to watch a couple more like videos that got released in the time of like my kind of absence from streaming, because some people have requested it, and that, and then maybe later on in the week, I'll begin my playthrough of Hollow Knight on stream. So if you guys are interested in that, stay posted. More information will be coming, but I'll be streaming that at the same time as always. So reacts for a few more days, and then Hollow Knight later on in the week. So V-Limit will be there for Hollow Knight. Nice. So I know virtually nothing about Hollow Knight. It's not a game that I would have picked up on my own because like the art style isn't for me. Like I kind of like Metroidvanias, but I kind of also like don't. Like they're very hit or miss. I've heard very good things about Hollow Knight, and since I kind of felt the same way about Lies of P, but it wasn't too bad, I figure why not try Hollow Knight. All right, so yeah, that'll be it for me for the stream for tonight. Thank you all so much for joining in, as always, whether or not you're actively participating or lurking. I appreciate it. The replays should be live on the channel once like the stream ends, so if you guys ever need to watch them while I'm not live, they should be archived in the live section of my channel. So once again, thank you so much for joining me. I'm struggling to find my closing screen. Okay, here we go. Thank you so much. Last Protagonist out.